You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Cool.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Addressing Gettysburg's Ask A Gettysburg Guide. And today is a special treat. We are recording on November 19th. And Eric, do you know what is so special about that day?
It's Friday.
That's right. It's Friday, November 19th. And really, seriously, what is so special about it?
Dedication Day.
It is, right. And so we have two very special guests.
Indeed.
And people have been very excited ever since we announced this. Almost as excited as when we announced Tom Berenger.
It's like the gravitational pull of the Civil War history field is centered on this shed right now.
Yes, exactly. And if a meteor were to fall on us, my God, the toppling of the whole regime that would cause, I don't know what I'm talking about, whatever. Ladies and gentlemen, with us today are two of your favorite people to listen to talk to, whatever. Tim Smith and Garry Adelman. Hello, gentlemen.
Hey.
Hello.
We've got you both here. We've had you on separately, of course, and everybody likes that. So now we have you both, and what a treat this is for them. We're talking today about the history of the park, right?
Yes.
Okay, now this was your idea.
Was it mine or Tim's?
Well, both was somebody. It wasn't mine. Was it yours?
No, it wasn't my idea.
Yeah.
You guys started having a private conversation on the email chain that I was included in, and guys ended up on this.
Right.
Actually, I think the original idea was to go from like 1750 to current.
Yeah, that wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, no, I would have fallen asleep.
We'd have needed several days for that.
Right, but so we're gonna take it from the end of the battle up until recent history. We're going right up to today now. I mean, we're living through that. We can recent history, right?
Sure.
That's good enough. Okay, good. So let's start us off then. Battle is over. The armies have mostly left, except for whatever they've left behind. Go.
Well, one thing I'd like to talk about today, Tim was slow to the punch, so I just jumped in, is even by the time photographers photographed the battlefield, even by the time that some of the earliest accounts are written, July 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 12th, when all the do-gooders come and everything like that, the battlefield is already changing. Remember, they're burying bodies, digging things up. They are, people are, dealing with the wreck of the town. There are fence rails all over the place that need to slowly be replaced. Farmers are trying to get back to normal. They are doing all sorts of things, right? Mm-hmm. It's not long before they'll be quarrying more of the battlefield to deal with damage on the battlefield in the first place. I like to point out that even at the Bloody Lane, within a day of the battle, there are people like slipping in the blood of the Bloody Lane before the photographers even arrive, that the Union soldiers are taking the Confederate soldiers and making them into a barricade, on the other side. So they're already being moved even before the photographers arrived. And I would suggest that a lot of those things are happening at Gettysburg. So, there is no such thing as a fixed point of what this battlefield is, because it never stopped changing, much like the battle lines themselves. Tim?
Well, I think as just a general overview of the kinds of things we're talking about after the battle, even early on, there was a fight between the forces of memorialization and the forces of commercialization. And I think that happened on every battlefield. It just seems more dramatic for us on the battlefield of Gettysburg. And, early on, there were people who saw the utility of preserving the area where the battle was fought. And I guess that gets to what Garry was just talking about, is after a major event such as this occurs, and I imagine today we have things that have happened like this, even like 9/11, or I'd say even a hurricane that wipes out a city. What should you leave or preserve to commemorate the occurrence that, that was the dramatic epicenter of whatever thing happened that you're talking about? And so you want to return to a sense of normalcy if you're the people who lived in this area. But even the people who live here see that something had occurred that is probably noteworthy and valuable to preserve and commemorate? And how do you go about doing that? But, I think it comes down to this area. It comes down to a local lawyer immediately after the battle named David McConaughey.
Yeah.
And David McConaughey lived here. He was here during the battle. He was a very prominent resident. He had actually proposed a concept in 1862, even before the Battle of Gettysburg, where the Evergreen Cemetery set aside a section to just bury soldiers from Adams County that were killed in the American Civil War. And he actually has his proposal printed in the newspaper. And if you read it, it is very much what ends up happening with the Soldiers National Cemetery after the battle. So early on, David McConaughey and, of course, David Wills, who was acting as an agent for Governor Curtin of Pennsylvania, when they come up with the concept of the Soldiers National Cemetery, they're really starting the effort to preserve the area where the battle was fought.
And I'll add, I think I recall William Fresnito saying it might even be in print, this idea that the Soldiers National Cemetery would become, while beautiful, while important, the beautification of that cemetery would become one of the greatest blights of the battlefield by bringing in trees that weren't there, by making the hill look differently. But I would even suggest that even before the cemetery is really going, while the bodies are being moved, it's McConaughey, who I think, Tim will correct me if I'm wrong because he's better on, what do I call it again, that local stuff?
Local crap.
Local crap. That McConaughey is offended when he sees farmers starting to plow over some of the natural lunettes and earthworks on the battlefield, that they want to take their fence rails back, out of the lunettes, say, on East Cemetery Hill. And he was the one who within 4 weeks of the battle, early August of 1863, he works to secure 4 acres there where Weidrich's battery is now. Those are the first 4 acres preserved. And by the way, east of Cemetery Hill. I've strongly suspected that's the first time I've ever heard that called anything like East Cemetery Hill, distinguishing the 2 cemetery hills from one another, just like Big Round Top and Little Round Top, And it's really him who, even while this cemetery thing is going on, and by the way, first it's going to be sort of his cemetery, as I remember, and then it's sort of a governmental sort of thing after that, or eventually Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association. But from McConaughey and his offense at the battlefield's features, as Tim said, the event happened. What's important to retain? Lunettes, stone walls, natural fortifications, and things like that. It was him who really started it. I would say the first battlefield park in America, but the folks at Fort Ticonderoga sort of disagree with that. So at least the first Civil War battlefield park.
So, all right. So the mindset back then, as far as memorializing and preserving things. So you mentioned 9/11. Nowadays, somebody gets in a car accident on the highway and there's a memorial where it happened. We're very quick to memorial. We want to memorialize everything. Was that the way it was back then, or is this kind of a new notion that's starting to take hold with the Civil War, that you've got to preserve and memorialize and mark everything?
Well, I mean, it's not necessarily a new thing, but what I think when we looked at, and Garry and I did a program called The First Battlefield Park or something like that on PCN, where we highlighted East Cemetery Hill. But one of the things I highlight or talk about is the efforts to memorialize Civil War sites and other historic sites. And again, along with what Garry was saying with Fort Ticonderoga, there are Revolutionary War sites where there's some marker or reminiscent prior to the Civil War, even the War of 1812 in Baltimore. There's a big monument to the Battle of North Point in Baltimore City and the War of 1812. But most of the monuments mark the sites of where people died. Mm-hmm. After the Battle of First Bull Run, there was a monument placed by some Southerners, some Confederate soldiers, of where what's his name, Colonel Bartow.
Bartow, yeah.
Bartow, and then at Second Bull Run, early after the Civil War, there's a memorial for the dead of Second Bull Run, and what am I thinking
Stones
of?
River?
That's right, exactly. There's a big monument to Stones River.
I'm in his head.
There are monuments placed early on during the war.
Right.
But, what I think is interesting about a lot of these early monuments, the monuments don't necessarily commemorate the battle as we see monuments today.
Right.
They commemorated the death of an individual, or
Here fell so and so,
and so we're really big into marking the places of death or the sites of death, or even when people are buried in graveyards. I think you could argue that some of the efforts to commemorate and memorialize these types of things came out of the the efforts to memorialize the grave sites of people. Like
so
in cemeteries.
Is it fair to say then that out of maybe Gettysburg or the Civil War as a whole, the idea of memorialization, what you're memorializing, is starting to change? So it's not just where someone died, but also where a regiment fought. And
or an
go
event
ahead.
occurred.
Yeah, obviously, because Gettysburg is not the first national cemetery, but it is the first national cemetery composed of dead from a battlefield, on that battlefield.
Okay.
So that's obviously changing. It's the first one,
Right.
like that. And secondly, Gettysburg is the first battlefield park, the first Civil War battlefield park. So it is starting to change. With the exception of Fort Ty, those other monuments really aren't places you can go and visit. So when it comes to that, during the Civil War, Gettysburg does have a good number of firsts. It's often credited with things it doesn't deserve. But in this case, something's changing. And I think it's actually happenstance. It was this big event. It was Pennsylvania's one shot at doing this sort of in the Civil War.
Right.
They would hope it would be their only one. And local people made it happen, local people plus the governor. And then, 150 years later, people are saying, come to Pennsylvania where the nation was born, come to Gettysburg where the nation was saved. I mean, there might have been, something, intentional there.
So McConaughey, he goes and he's offended by farmers trying to get back to their lives, to reclaim their property. And
am I right about that, Tim? Do you remember this account?
Yes, but I wouldn't say he's offended. The word offended, he's concerned that the place where this turning point of the Civil War,
Right.
early on, people believe that people are altering the terrain, and that the terrain where this great victory is fought should be preserved. Now, I want to mention 3 things are going on. One of them is the Battle of Gettysburg was fought on northern soil.
right.
And after the Gettysburg campaign, the war returns to Virginia. And this area can be visited by large amounts of northern visitor, people coming in by train. You can get here by train. And you can't go to Spotsylvania. You can't go to Fredericksburg and visit the sites of these battles. They're in southern controlled territory.
Right.
So this was in an area where people could visit it. Like during the Gettysburg Address, you could have a ceremony where lots of people could come and without fear of being in a battle zone and, being in the North, in the United States, not in the territory that's in rebellion. And then number 2, of course, we have this concept of the Soldiers' National Cemetery, which invites people to come and see where all the people who fought for the Northern Army and were killed in the battle are buried.
Come, visit, picnic, stroll in a very 19th century way.
They're like parks.
It's
Yes,
a
they are.
park. And then thirdly is David McConaughey. Now, David McConaughey gets his influence from some other townspeople. Early on, the efforts to preserve the Gettysburg battlefield are townspeople. There's a letter from a Gettysburg merchant named George Arnold, and he's writing in, I believe it's late July of 1863. He's writing to a comrade who's in the Army, a guy named William T. King, and he talks about how there's a great opportunity here for the town of Gettysburg, because from this point forward, there's going to be lots and lots of people coming to Gettysburg to see where the battle was fought. So the townspeople should make some effort to accommodate those visitors. And, Gettysburg had been suffering from the outbreak of the Civil War economically because of the destruction of the carriage industry and the fact that people weren't traveling during the Civil War the way they did before the Civil War. And Gettysburg's a road hub, and there's 8 hotels, and all the roads lead here, and train comes into the town, so that we have the built infrastructure already in existence to accommodate tourists and hotels and visitors, and we need restaurants, and we have the commercialization already in place. And keep in mind, a lot of other battlefields don't have anything like that. So we have the built-in infrastructure here already.
And the railroad, did you mention the railroad?
The railroad,
Yeah, that's going to bring people.
We have a railroad that it came into town in late 1858 and 1859. A railroad station's built. So it was perfect in that sense. And there's this letter by this local merchant who realizes all this early on. And, of course, David McConaughey, I think the people who have criticized David McConaughey over the years, and he is criticized in recent articles as being sort of maybe conniving and sort of
he's a lawyer, isn't he?
Self-serving. Veronica's not here today, so I don't know if we should push that. But yes, he's looked upon in some circles as looking out for himself,
right,
more than the interests of preservation.
He did try to make the cemetery sort of his.
Well, then,
yeah.
But then what is Bachelder doing?
Yeah, I mean, one could argue. Someone could always argue that battlefield tour guides are taking advantage of the battlefield to make money.
I think every single one of us is.
Because, because we're interested in the preservation of the site or in commemorating the site. Now, we would argue
that's not
differently.
true.
Some of us are interested in preservation.
Yeah.
You wouldn't, I mean.
No, I think people like to tell the story and make money off it because, A, you got to eat, and B, you want people to know why this is an important place that should be preserved.
But when you read David McConaughey's, addresses and the things he says and the course he took in preserving the land, I mean, I believe his heart was in it, and that he saw a deeper there's a deeper story here than just him trying to create some kind of commercial entity to make money.
I would say, first of all, Gary, local crap can be cool. I'm answering myself. Local crap is sometimes pretty interesting. And two, is that the William T. King whose bullet-riddled sign? Is that the Adams County Historical Society?
Yes.
Now that makes me question. He's looking for an opportunity. Did he fire bullets through the sign to make it more, make his shop sort of more?
Scandal.
Yeah. So the bullet-riddled sign we did get from his daughter in the 1940s. So, he didn't take advantage of it while he was alive. But the interesting thing about it, to me, about David McConaughey is, so David McConaughey, with the help of Pennsylvania officials, after the Civil War, runs for the state legislature. He is elected locally. He is able to convince the state legislature to incorporate the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association, and he gets grants from the state of Pennsylvania to buy land. And some of that land he has already has an agreement with the landowner, as Gary mentioned, early on in late July, early August 1863, to sell that land to this GBMA, which he's planning on organizing. He does organize it. He does pay the property owner. And in 64, 65, and 66, he purchases part of Little Round Top, part of Culp's Hill, East Cemetery Hill, and I think even a little slip in Reynolds Woods. So early on, he purchases important sites around the field. So then when visitors start coming into the town immediately after the Civil War, even before the Civil War is over, you could argue, not only can they visit the Soldiers' National Cemetery, but they can also visit the grounds of the GBMA and tour some of these areas. And then this group of people who are on the board of the GBMA can control how these places are preserved and how you get to them.
So someone who's new to all this, the GBMA is?
The Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association.
Okay,
so this is an 1864 founded group that is going to be the steward of the Gettysburg Battlefield between then and the early 1890s.
And they're buying up little parcels of land here and there whenever they can, right?
Yes.
So it's not all contiguous like it is today, where you can go from one to the other without, okay. what was the most, in the early days, even when the war was still going on, what did people want to see the most? What was the most popular site?
I think that's easy. You know, we would love to think that it's Pickett's Charge or Little Round Top, but people in the know who have read about this, people who have read Frazanito's work, who have read some of Tim and mine Tim's stuff, that's in the proper order, by the way, in terms of name. You don't know that it was Culp's Hill, the bullet-riddled trees, George Sears Green's fortifications of earth, log, and stone. It was close to town. Now, people liked East Cemetery Hill, but something about Culp's Hill, the bullet-riddled trees, really did it for people. And, you know, of those places, it's no surprise that those places that were first preserved were either the subject of important stories or they had the natural remnants of the battle, the lunettes, the earthworks, and, you know, and the bullet-riddled trees.
Yeah, and, you know, McPherson's Woods, as we tend to call it, you know, later referred to as Reynolds Woods, actually owned by Jacob Herbst.
That's what Tim likes to call it, is Reynolds Woods.
Those areas were also their woods, and they had bullet holes in the trees.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's really interesting when you drive out and you stop in the middle of a field and somebody says, hey, there was a battle in this field. And, you know, early on, maybe there were some temporary graves left over you could see, especially by Southern soldiers who were left on the battlefield afterwards. But the most interesting places are visually interesting, like the entrenchments and the breastworks, and you can actually see where the battle was fought, and the trees just, you know, riddled of bullets. They're obviously going to be the more exciting places.
So when you go on Culp's Hill today, you can see the remnants of the breastworks. Those are the originals? I mean, that's what's left of the originals, or was there ever a point where they tried to rebuild them?
They've been restacked in, if I'm correct, by the War Department in the 1890s and by the CCC in the 1930s.
Okay, so we'll get there.
But that's just redug. They've never tried to recreate
Yeah,
them.
I think they're on the same line, no basic.
Well, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
The photos go way back.
Yeah. Okay, so then the war's over, the GBMA has got it. By the time they're done, would you say 1890s?
1893 or 1895, depending on what you count.
Well, there's an interesting development here that I think we should mention in the GBMA. We have to split the GBMA in half. So early on, local people formed this organization with the help of Pennsylvania officials, and there were some Pennsylvania officials involved in it, like a guy named Vanderslice. And he wrote a book.
Let me just say that. So this is, you want to learn about the GBMA, there's lots of summaries out there. You could look at, if you could find a copy of my early Gettysburg battlefield, little summaries of the park and whatnot. But J.M. Vanderslice, Gettysburg Then and Now, I wish this was an old photo book of then and now photos,
that'd be cool.
But it's not that. It's basically a history of the Gettysburg battlefield.
Hold the cover up to the, hold it still there for a second.
How's that?
There you go. That's good.
So this
Gettysburg
is,
Then and Now.
And I somehow found it. I have all the text on a Word doc that I was able to steal from the internet legally. So the copies of this are hard to find, but I bought mine, it looks like, let's say, I hope you all write in your books, in 1990 at the Horse Soldier in Gettysburg. So I've had this book a while, and it looks like it.
Yeah.
But this is sort of the history that really gets into it, and it tells the story Tim is about to tell about, you know, the first 9 years versus what's going to, or the first, I guess, 14 years against what's going to happen later. It's
and what year was that written?
This was written in 1895, I think.
Yeah, I think it was written at the time that the GBMA was turned over to the, the federal government.
Okay.
So,
gotcha.
And it was commissioned, it says in it, to be like a history of the GBMA before the federal government became involved in the battlefield.
Okay.
But basically...
Was there a reason they did that?
Oh, yeah. We'll get to that.
Okay.
We have to talk about something else first.
Okay, go ahead.
So early on, the local citizens are running the battlefield, and I think it's probably the veterans that fought here thought that was kind of interesting that, locals were running it. Of course, you listeners, a lot of them probably know that a guy named John Bachelder gets involved in the GBMA, who is the, somewhat self-proclaimed historian of the Gettysburg battle. But he was very knowledgeable about battle and basically spent his life after the battle was over studying the fighting that occurred here. And
now, when you say after the battle was over, how soon after the battle was over are you talking?
Well, he came here he came to Gettysburg after the battle, and he started studying it almost immediately.
Like within days?
Within a few weeks.
Oh,
Within
okay,
a few
weeks.
weeks.
Okay.
I think we have the date in one of his reminiscences where he arrives. Maybe it's July 21st. Is it? You remember
Sounds
that?
about
Something
right,
like that? He comes, and he spends like 90 days on the battlefield, studying the battle and writing about the battle and drawing the battlefield.
The first loser. Oh, my God, 90 days?
Yeah. And then, by the end of 1863, he completes his isometrical map of the battlefield, but he early on becomes friends with David McConaughey and others that will be very prominent in the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association, and eventually he becomes their historian. But I think a lot of people saw this cute little park that the local Gettysburg people had preserved as going nowhere, and kind of just maybe taking advantage of visitors. By 1878, George Arnold, who we mentioned earlier, who had a letter talking about the commercialization of the battlefield, he built a wooden tower on East Cemetery Hill with the permission of the GBMA, of course, which he was a part of. And it was called the Gettysburg Prospect Tower. And it appears in many photographs prior to its removal in 1896. But he built this huge commercial tower, and people were going up in the tower, and you'd pay money to go up in the tower, just like the tower in the 1970s. And for an extra fee, you could listen to a battlefield guide talk from the tower.
And the view was, as Tim would say in Baltimore, grand beyond imagination. Is what the sign said.
And, also, we should mention early on during this period, there are tour guides. People are giving tours of the battlefield to visitors coming in. But I don't think anybody really thought that this organization was really that important, and a lot of people were skeptical of where they were going with this commercial entity, as some people considered it. And then something very important happened, and that was in 1878 when the Pennsylvania GAR had an encampment at Gettysburg. And they had a huge encampment. The veterans of the Civil War were getting older. There were well-established organizations in little towns and cities all across the North where veterans from those areas got together and met on a regular basis. And the representatives came to Gettysburg, and they saw what the battlefield of Gettysburg was becoming and how the locals had preserved the land. And there were some interpretation of the battlefield, and there were some people who were interested in the history of the battle who were coming in to visit it. And I kind of see it, and I'm sure it happened over the course of a few years from 1875 to 1879. The veterans decided to infiltrate the GBMA.
The takeover.
And become members of the organization.
Makes sense.
To get some of their members on the board of directors of the organization and basically take it over. So starting in 1878, the GBMA really became an organization made up of veterans of the battle, as opposed to local people with some help by Pennsylvania officials that had been prior to that. And when they took over, and they started bringing in money and getting different states to help them organize the battlefield effort, that's when we start seeing monuments. In the summer of 1878, 2 Pennsylvania GAR groups put up monuments on the battlefield. Chester County, one of their GAR posts, put up a monument to the spot where Charles Frederick Taylor had fallen during the battle. And, of course, Erie, Pennsylvania, they put up a monument to where Colonel Strong Vincent had fallen.
And by the way, those are both July 1878. We don't have dates. We don't know which one came first, but it was
they're both in the same week.
We wish, but we don't know the exact dates and times.
I think it's my fault partly that everybody always used to say, Colonel Strong Vincent's monument is the oldest one on the battlefield. And I would just to be contrary, I'd always bring up the fact that I don't know about that. There's another monument wrecked the same week.
Now, so you're talking monuments, but there's memorials, there's monuments, there's markers.
Yeah.
So are you using these words interchangeably today, or are you going to define them for us?
I mean, it depends on what you call a monument, marker, or tablet, or a marking, because probably the earliest sort of monuments on the battlefield are either painted on wooden signs, or there are things like rock carvings, like Colonel Strong Vincent fell here.
Or that sign that says where General Reynolds was killed.
Yeah. So
on the tree.
Yeah, I mean, before that, there was an R on the tree.
Yeah.
Even before that. So even maybe before the rock carvings, before the rough David Atchison rock carving, before those on Little Round Top, even a tree carving. So what's a monument?
Right.
Yeah. So
right.
I don't know if I, and then if I'm really, I don't know if I really like to get into what is a monument, what is not a monument. John Batchelder at some point started driving stakes into the ground.
Right. Instead of eating them.
And then putting numbers on the stakes, telling you a number, and then he had a book, which we don't have access to tells you what the
Well, it's in the
stake
Huntington
represents.
Library, right? I mean, we have
Part of it, at least I've seen.
not all of it.
Yeah.
But there is I guess what I'm getting at for the sake of newbies out there is that there is a specific definition for a memorial and a monument and markers and all that. What do you mean no?
I would say no.
No, well, let's see. With everything going on in the news, the trust has attempted to do that, but we don't even put that on the website because
So there is no.
No.
Well, I would say this: if something
So what is the urn? What is the urn
How about
in?
if something's dedicated? How about if you can find a dedication ceremony of
And
something?
what word they use?
It's a memorial. But if it's just something that was placed by someone and there was no ceremony or anything like that.
But for Smith's Battery, there was only a couple of people there.
Yeah, I know.
The actual thing. So, I mean, it's hard to say. But we know what, if you take a tablet, like put up by the government, that's hard to be seen as a monument. By the way, those tablets, occupy, there's probably more of them than almost anything else. Those tablets plus, flank markers and things like that. Is a flank marker a monument? It does say what happened at that particular place.
Part of a monument.
Is it memorial in concept? I think that maybe get at the question a little bit more, like how a government tablet, which is not memorializing, it's saying what happened where.
It's informational.
Informational, good.
Thank you.
But the rock carvings, the tree carving, the granite monuments, the first Minnesota, the second Massachusetts, those are memorializing something.
Right. I always thought there was a difference. So you're telling me that there is not officially a difference.
Not that I know of.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
I think it's something we fight with.
Yes.
We argue about.
Yeah.
It is.
There is no.
There's several
specific-
thing that you and I have been arguing about. One thing in particular. Yes.
Is it about Mike Lentz?
Yes, it is. Should we allow Mike Lentz in the studio?
Here he is.
feel like that's an
No, well, it's coming up later on in the question,
You
so
bring it up,
we'll
'cause I
bring
don't
it.
even remember.
Thanks. I'm glad you remember our conversations.
Now, Matt, do you think I should be eating celery?
Go
right now?
for it. In fact, I'll
let's-
take one if you want to give me one.
All right.
We'll
But
crunch
I
together.
think-
Eric loves that.
Okay. I think, so while you're crunching, I'll talk.
ahead.
So what I think is very important to know here is that there is a difference between the early GBMA from 1863 to 1878 and then 1878 until 1895.
All right. So go
So
into
we can
this
break
now.
it down in different categories. But once in 1878, where the first real
Did you wash this,
monuments
Gary?
outside the National Cemetery are erected. So again, there you go. Is the Minnesota urn the first real monument on the battlefield? I mean, again,
The cornerstone is already there for the Soldiers' National Monument.
yeah, the soldiers.
What if it's not done yet? Does that
It's not done now. Yeah.
Does it count? What about the rock carvings on Little Round Top?
Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well.
So, but once they start placing monuments on the battlefield, and what we're talking about with a monument dedication is a group of people advertise that on a certain day that everyone from a certain town and all the relatives of all the people who were in that unit come to Gettysburg and they dedicate a monument on the spot on the field where they fought. I think if we're just talking about something like that, because I already mentioned that the thing about Colonel Strong Vincent's monument and the thing about Colonel Charles Frederick Taylor's monument, and two monuments placed in 1879 by the 27th Connecticut, one marking the spot where Lieutenant Colonel Henry Merwin fell, and Captain Jedediah Chapman, they're put up early on too. But again, all these monuments mark the spot where people died. In 1879, the 2nd Massachusetts Infantry put up a monument on Culp's Hill. And it does say on it, this monument is commemorated to the dead of the unit. But the monument is placed by the survivors to mark their line of battle. And I don't know how many other people's minds were just blown by this when it occurred.
So is this a new concept then?
But to me,
marking a line of battle?
To me,
no, keep going, Tim.
This
Go
is
ahead.
a new concept.
Okay.
To me, this is something different because it's not about the dead. It's about the living.
Right.
It is rather for us, the living.
Yeah. So this monument commemorates the survivors, it says on it, of the 2nd Massachusetts. And it marks the spot where they made their impact in the battle. And maybe I draw too much out of this, like that Weeks book that I really hate, where every time somebody sells a postcard, they're changing the course of history.
And it also makes them landed gentry.
Yeah, but this event of putting up a monument to mark the spot where your unit was positioned during the battle seems to have really caught on very quickly. And after that monument, then you start to get dozens and then hundreds of monuments placed by Northern veterans to mark the spot where their unit was positioned during the battle.
Now, is this what we call the memorialization period?
Yeah, the
Or just
Is this
the memorial
the beginning
period.
of the memorial
I think it's
period?
the memorial period, officially. Now, just real quick, this idea of, okay, some people from Massachusetts want to have a monument, and then some people from this state want to have one. Eventually, the states themselves said, no, we want all of our units there. So Massachusetts gave $2,500 or $3,500 per unit. And Pennsylvania eventually in 1887 gave $1,500. And that bought you a big monument, not a small marker, but a big one. So some of those states already put one up, and then they put up another one because their state is funding it now. So you have this layered Union memorial approach. Now the Confederates, not as anxious to memorialize a place in the North where they didn't win. Okay, I'll say it, where they lost, and lost pretty bad too, aren't going to really get into that. And when they could memorialize it, it often wasn't near where the fighting took place because of a GBMA rule that it had to be on your main line of battle. And since the Southerners did most of the attacking, that placed their monuments a mile from where the fighting actually was.
Right. And now, so was there controversy early on when Confederates wanted to start putting monuments up to the regiments?
Well, one of the first regimental monuments on the battlefield for the South is the 2nd Maryland Infantry on Culp's Hill. And it was dedicated, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Gary, because you have all your books right there.
I don't need the
November
books.
9th, November 19th, 1886. How's that?
Sure.
And when it was dedicated, immediately there were nasty editorials in the newspaper. Pittsburgh, their newspapers are filled with veterans groups getting together, Northern veterans groups, and wanting the monument removed.
Oh, yeah.
So there's always been controversy about, the placement of Southern regimental or Southern monuments, and that one was a big one of the first ones, and it was a big thing. One thing that occurs to me in that monument, I forget if I read this in one of the Baltimore newspapers or not, but I think they're fortunate that when they put up the monument, they put it right outside of the Union entrenchments and not next to the avenue inside. That would have really done it. But it was just outside, and then he put an advanced position marker to mark their advance of the charge.
Well, let's remember too, so the GBMA, both sides, right? But it's 2 Yanks and 1 Reb on the, on the commission later. I'm sorry, I'm confusing that with the War Department. But even when it's GBMA, this is a Northern-dominated thing, right?
Right.
So they're going to make the rules, and the Maryland unit, the 1st Maryland, had to put up with the indignity of changing their name to the 2nd Maryland for the purpose of their monument, but sort of said formerly 1st Maryland on it, and then the advanced marker just says 1st Maryland, so they kind of had something to live with as well.
What is the story with that? Was that added later, the formerly 1st Maryland?
I don't know that.
I think they made him at it. That's good. Yeah, I should have prepared for that. But my memory of it is they They are the 1st Maryland Infantry at the Battle of Gettysburg, but later they reorganized as the 2nd Maryland. So the same unit was later the 2nd Maryland,
Right.
but then they put on their monument the 2nd Maryland, so not to be confused with the 1st Maryland Union soldiers. So it probably was done a little bit later.
The
It's at
two
bottom,
1st
too.
Maryland Union units.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
1st Maryland Eastern Shore Regiment, 1st Maryland. Of course, you could say there's Maryland Cavalry, the 1st Maryland Cavalry units. Those cavalry units get confused. I think they should have to change their name.
Okay, here we go. We're going to start bashing cavalry now.
Go.
But I guess the point is that you should know is that the veterans' rendition of the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association was not very accommodating to Southerners' needs to commemorate and memorialize the battlefield. Now, one of the interesting things is in the first rendition of the GBMA, where John Bachelder was the historian, there was in 1869 there was a big meeting where he invited Northern officers and Confederate officers that both fought at the Battle of Gettysburg to come to Gettysburg and to talk about how they would mark the sites that occurred, the sites that were important on the battlefield. And it was at that meeting, apparently, where some of the Southern field officers, specifically officer with Pickett, mentioned the clump of trees as the aiming point for Pickett's charge. And that was really where John Batchelder said, hey, yeah, we should commemorate the area where the aiming point of Pickett's charge, what has later come to be known as the high watermark of the Confederacy, the high tide of the Southern Rebellion, was aiming for.
Was that the one that was at the Springs Hotel?
There was a meeting. Yeah, he had a meeting at the Springs Hotel.
And then, the Confederates got in a fight with a couple of Yankees or something?
Well, I don't know if there was
Wasn't
any
there,
fight.
only a few Confederates that came to
Yeah,
that?
well, one thing that happened was
3?
One of the Southerners, I forget it might have been Wade Hampton. Someone objected and told his friends they shouldn't go, that they shouldn't be part of it.
Right.
Now, what's really interesting is Gettysburg College, David McConaughey invites Robert E. Lee to come to this 1869 meeting. And Gettysburg College, I believe it is, has the response that Robert E. Lee wrote to David McConaughey. And I think it's fascinating because, although maybe Lee had no interest in it, we probably would understand Lee not having an interest in it. But the letter is written in such a way that I forget the exact wordage of it, but you get the distinct idea that Lee doesn't think it's a good idea to start memorializing or commemorating the sites of these Civil War battles.
Doesn't he say something about reopening wounds or something like that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably was a good idea.
Yeah. So so it's interesting to see Robert E. Lee's take on that after the Civil War about putting up monuments or commemorating these things.
Right, because we're all fighting over monuments that are up to him now coming down, and he's just like, no, man. No.
He probably wouldn't want them.
Yeah, exactly.
But I imagine a lot of veterans felt about that early on. And again, I like to stress that early on the veterans don't seem concerned about these things. But then as they get older and they have these strong organizations, then they're more inclined to have monuments placed. Another thing, there's all these little tidbits and sidebars that we could get into in this topic. But think about this. A lot of the colonels of the regiments and the officers that fought in these units 20 years after the Civil War are now in Congress. They're running for governor. Some of them will run for president. They see that fame on the battlefield will help them in their political campaigns. And even if they themselves aren't the ones promoting these concepts, the 1880s and 90s newspapers are filled with, by the way, did you know that this guy running for Congress led a charge at Gettysburg?
And I mean, this results directly in the Atlanta cyclorama. I mean, that is a political thing for John Blackjack Logan. It results in the Walker paintings of Joe Hooker in front of Lookout Mountain. And it results in 1/5 of the state of Illinois, my home state, which I'm not exactly proud of our finances always, but 1/5 of the 1905 budget of the whole state for the whole year went to the Vicksburg Monument. And as I've heard Tim say, do you think you could get these things through legislatures when every legislature and all of Congress is populated by Civil War veterans? It's really a neat thing.
And so Pennsylvania went so far as to I don't know if I guess it's in the Pennsylvania part of the legislature that creates the monuments for Pennsylvania Day in 1889 that you couldn't put a recognizable figure as a statue on the monument.
And that's just Pennsylvania's rule.
That was Pennsylvania's rule. And they did that because if they allowed them to do it, Congressman so-and-so would be on top of this monument, and Congressman so-and-so would be on top of this monument. And, there would be a big plaque about this guy because he was running for president.
Right, okay.
And I think I think it's a direct result of that. I don't think I'm exaggerating.
But apparently, it's easy to get around that rule. You can just put up someone that looks just like Strong Vincent.
Right.
I mean, that looks like him in one of the only photos of him we have in the exact same pose.
Yeah,
clearly him. And say, but that's not Strong Vincent.
No, that's not.
I mean, we bring that up as an example of, and then we criticize the role, but you have to understand the era that the role is being made.
Well, and I do know a lot of people. In fact, I think it was in our forum they asked about which one was it, Eric? Was it Van Horn Ellis or who was it?
Yeah, somebody wanted to know why Van Horn Ellis was allowed to be on top of.
I think it's a
124th.
I think it's a Pennsylvania rule,
and that's
it is.
That was the answer that came.
And his is also that's the first. Regimental monument at Devil's Den. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, those rules emerged. It's not like in 1864 the GBMA got together and said, okay, this is it. They didn't even know.
Right, so you have to see what's bad before
if
you
that's
make
an
the rule.
1884 monument, if I'm correct, I mean...
Yes, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'll throw it another one further. I think the 124th New York at Devil's Den is the first New York regimental monument on the battlefield.
Oh, okay.
How can I do it's the first one in the history of the world.
How can you top
take it a little
that?
further.
All right, so real quick, because we're getting close to doing an hour, and I wanted to be finished with the background by an hour. So
oh my God, we're already close to an hour?
Well, we had...
We're like 15 minutes.
We're it's not exactly an hour. But
here's the 124th New York Monument dedication.
Right here. There you go.
That's close.
You see that, Eric?
Hang on, I was consulting my copy. Hey, 2 seconds.
Hold
2
it there.
seconds.
Hold it there. Don't leave it.
There we go. There we go.
Okay, there we go. There.
Yep.
Very nice. Okay. Okay.
Page 121.
So let me say
behind on every other picture today. So.
Let me ask you this then: between 1863, end of the battle, and 1880, what was or who was the most influential force in basically setting the stage for what the story of the Battle of Gettysburg will be for the next 158 years? Is there someone from that era or something?
John
Batchelder's.
There you go.
Is he going to be the interpretive guy?
He's got the book. What to see and how to see it. 1872.
Yeah, I think 1873, 1872. Yeah.
So he's got that book. There are other people in Gettysburg trying to get stuff out, Gilbert and other people, but they didn't beat Batchelder to the punch. He was first. He put out the map.
And he spoke with veterans, and he walked the field with veterans. I mean, while they're still convalescing here, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't he with guys that were still here?
Yeah, he
in
would
the
have seen the
hospitals?
guys at Camp Letterman. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I mean, he's got that connection right there.
On.
So is Batchelder's stuff still basically like it? Like, in other words, is everybody after that just adding to what he did, or has anybody corrected him along the way?
Well, I think, yeah. I mean, note that we don't call it Weeds Hill, first of all. Little Round Top.
Okay.
I mean, he didn't always win.
Right.
Naming things is hard, by the way.
Sure.
And, his greatest victory is the high water mark.
Tim's been trying to name, what was it, Spangler's Hill.
And note this, by the way. He said that the second Massachusetts monument was at the base was on Culp's Hill.
On Culp's Hill. He did say that.
Not only is it like at Spangler Spring, but it's not even on Lower Culp's Hill,
Right.
or I'd like to call Little Culp's Hill, but that's never going to catch on. But Spangler's Hill, I mean, I bet you I can get Little Culp's Hill to stick before Spangler's Hill. That's never going to work.
I don't know. I think Spangler's Hill, people like that.
I know, you two might.
Yeah.
It's never going to catch. And what is it? What movie is it? Mean Girls? Fetch is never going to catch on?
Well, I don't never
never
watch that,
stick?
Gary.
Well, you're missing out.
Am I?
You have to watch your high school movies. Yeah.
I'll consult with my wife.
It's in
She
the
was
top
in high
15.
school when that came out.
Yeah.
Is it?
But I do like John Batchelder's basic story of
Teen
the battle.
Witch was my favorite high school
Never
movie.
saw that. That's not even in the top 20, probably, though.
It's the worst. All right, go ahead.
Breakfast
I'm sorry.
Club, number one.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, but yeah. Go ahead, Gary. All right, Tim.
No, I do like John
Batchelder.
Batchelder's basic story of the battle. And, if you read his basic story of the battle, that a lot of the things that he came up with, we still use. And I think that happens a lot on different aspects of the fighting, but overall. Now, I noticed, and Gary and I, when we do our walking tour that we on Sunday, we'll probably get into this. We love to talk about this. But I think a lot of people have looked at his concept for the high watermark memorial, the aiming point of Pickett's charge, and the high tide of the Southern Rebellion being that area and aiming point and all that, that they look at it as some nefarious scheme created by Bachelder to self-promote his concept of the battle. But you have to try to understand that at the time Bachelder was pushing the clump of trees, it was privately owned. The GBMA did not own that area, and there was no way to even get to that area where the angle was. You had to do a tour. If you did tour the battlefield, you drove down the Emmitsburg Road, and you stopped on the Emmitsburg Road and looked over a couple hundred yards at the angle. You couldn't really see it from the other side on the Tawnytown Road. There was no way to get up onto that spot. And John Batchelder was pushing for the GBMA to purchase the land where the Union line was on top of Cemetery Ridge. And so I think it's somewhat similar in preservation circles, Gary. Let's say that a preservation group, not the American Battlefield Trust, of course.
I don't know what you're going to say.
Let's
but
say
I'm
a
sure you're right.
preservation group is trying to buy a piece of land and preserve it.
Right.
They tend to draw a map and move the units onto the spot of land that they're trying to preserve.
We don't do that.
Oh.
And I was very critical. I probably don't mind saying it. The GBPA, when they put all the troops on Camp Letterman property or the Lady Farm that weren't there, really angered me. I don't mind saying
I
it.
can hear it.
Yell. I'm sure these
Tim doesn't
guys
get mad on this show the way he does out in the field.
these guys will yell at me. It's all right. But when you move, so should it surprise us that John Batchelder was telling people, "Hey, we need to buy this piece of land over here. It's really important." And then today, people are critical of him because he was overstating, they say, the importance of that site. Of course, he's making it into the site where the American Civil War turned.
Right.
The turning point.
The one thing is I just want to address
Go ahead.
is this idea that about the aiming point. I find it interesting that a lot of people talk about, was it the aiming point, what it wasn't. First of all, the attack hit where it did, from approximately those trees over to the Bryan farm, right? And two, that line was like 1.25 miles wide. I'm not sure it matters. I mean, no matter what, it was going to hit on a 1/2 mile wide front or a 1/4 mile wide front, no matter what. So I just wanted to get that out there. The people don't seem to even consider that. I mean, they're marching forward in 1.25 mile wide line.
Right.
I'm just not sure it matters.
And then there's lots of turning points. I mean, why are people obsessed with this idea that there's just one time where
Because we
things
need
turn?
it. People need it neatly wrapped up in a bow.
I mean, you could argue that Antietam was a major turning point in the Emancipation
Well, they're all turning
Proclamation.
points.
Sumter,
Sure.
biggest turning point
And
of all.
Wilderness, where Grant loses and then continues south instead of retreating back to Washington. I think there's lots of turning points.
E.P. Alexander called that the turning point of the war in the East. When Grant moved south.
Look at that.
Cool. I didn't know that. Cool.
He just said it, but he didn't say it in the
I was
sarcastic way.
sarcastic.
No, it
I
was
was being
real cool.
sarcastic to myself
Yeah.
for not knowing that.
I've already talked to myself on this episode. So.
But I think the important thing is, what my point is John Bachelder is having trouble getting people to recognize that they should purchase the area of Cemetery Ridge where the Union Army made its stand on July 3rd.
Who owned the copse of trees then?
Well, private farmers at a bunch of properties intersect that spot.
That's like the black section of town, right?
It's the back of several properties.
But Basil Biggs?
At the time, right after the Civil War, Basil Biggs.
Excuse me.
Basil, I guess. Basil.
Wasn't he like chopping down trees and they're like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Was that Batchelder that was like,
yeah, Batchelder complains that farmers chopping down trees, but he doesn't say who it is.
Okay.
Basil Biggs.
But yeah. And I don't know exactly who they buy all the land from, when they buy it, but they are able to eventually purchase all the land. And then, what does it carry? In 1882, they build... they put in the avenue, Round Top Avenue.
I was just about to.
Go ahead.
Just show the camera the note I was just saying about what I wanted to talk about here, if it's legible. Roads and Trolley.
There you go.
So,
perfect.
So go for Round Top Avenue, Tim, if I may. May I?
Please. I'm learning from you.
No, well, the roads are my thing, sort of. So,
Yeah. Well, go ahead with roads, because I've become obsessed with the old road beds that are there in plain sight, but you got to know where to look,
Yeah.
So go ahead and talk about roads.
And a lot of what I learned initially about the roads has to come from creepy Uncle Timmy here, who really taught me about all these things here.
Cool.
I usually apply that term to myself, but that went over a little bit better than I expected. In any case,
funny.
If you're going to open something up as a park, people need to access it.
Sure.
And they need to get their carriage there. So you're going to need some sort of a road. And there were roads on the battlefield, the Emmitsburg Road, the Wheatfield Road, the Baltimore Pike. It's a road hub. Mm-hmm. But it didn't really provide access to a lot of the lands that the GBMA was preserving. So you've got an era of roads that are sprouting up, especially when the critical mass of land gave them something to see. So you've got them sprouting up in the 1870s, 1880s, and by 1894, there's some good, decent roads, most of them dirt, around the battlefield. But you talk about the battlefield changing. I mean, this is substantial.
Right.
And you're talking about those turning largely into the battlefield avenues that, we drive on today. Now, those battlefield avenues were originally created on my favorite system, the Telford system, who had a competitor named McAdam, and of course McAdam won. We all know him.
We know his name,
Telford. And then those were made for carriages. And
what was the Telford system?
The Telford system was, they would lay a bed of dirt, and then they would take large, ideally pointy rocks, 6, 8 inches wide, 10 inches wide. They would be pointy, and they would put those on their back so the point is facing up. And then they would take medium-sized rocks and put them between them to keep the pointy rocks sticking up. And then they would put 1 and 2 inch rocks on top of that and then roll it with a thing of gravel on top of that, and it would last for centuries, is what they said.
Almost a Roman road.
Like a Roman, okay.
Yeah, but they were crowned. They had a little bit of things going on and gutters on the side, so they were pretty advanced. And
sounds expensive.
Yeah, but it's government money, so they were making them. Now, those were made for slow-moving carriages, and when cars started going 10, 15, 20 miles an hour, you can no longer deal with the curves that were easy to handle by carriage. I mean, hairpin, no big deal. So they started straightening them out. So you have the GBMA roads, you have the early War Department roads, and then those roads were later straightened out in general, and some were removed. Webb Avenue, Harrow Avenue, Chamberlain Avenue. And
where's Chamberlain Avenue?
Chamberlain Avenue is that path. It's now paved again that goes around from the monument up toward the 44th New York. Now, that used to be a drivable avenue. Harrow Avenue and Webb are right at the angle, and they're both gone as well. There are also grassy avenues that, Custer.
Yes. Were those always grassy?
And Neal, yes, that were always grassy avenues as well. So we have had series of roads here, and this is something Tim, just really got into early on, finding the old locations of the roads and where the roads have moved. It's great.
No, and then what's the one? A ranger told me, I can't remember who it was. He called it Kilpatrick Avenue.
Yes, Kilpatrick Avenue.
Is that the name of it?
Yes. So Kilpatrick Avenue, if I'm correct, is on one of the foothills of Big Round Top.
No, that's not what I'm thinking of. It's down South Cavalry Field, across the street from the big old.
Yeah, it's big around on the base, and I think
you're
that
talking
avenue
that
was
much
mentioned in the GBMA report.
Yeah, so
that's an avenue that never really got put in.
So here we're
that
talking
was always
about,
grass.
No, it was kind of dirt.
Yeah, it was dirt. So to learn about the GBMA, you need your Vanderslice book, Gettysburg Then and Now.
Okay.
But to learn about, the War Department period, try to find a copy of the Gettysburg National Military Park Commission reports. This is the 1893 to 1904 version, and let me just show you. What this consists of is a series of reports for those years and photos from 1895 to 1904.
Nice.
10, 20, 30 at a time. And you've seen these. I don't even know which one I showed there. But they were documenting their work, and in the process, documenting woodlots and all sorts of great things, okay? Now, what I'll say is that the Gettysburg Discussion Group, not Gettysburg Discussion Group for Overly Sensitive People on Facebook, which is one of my favorite Facebook pages. I just adore that. There's also a Gettysburg Discussion Group that has moved over to Facebook.
Yeah.
But their old site has all these reports. I mean, and when I want to go give a tour, I will often search, for the avenue I want to talk about, Doubleday Avenue. I'll search in Vanderslice, and I'll search in these reports, and you can learn about these roads, and you can learn about the battlefield features.
Are these books still in print?
No. So you have to find.
So we got to steal them from you.
The Vanderslice one was reprinted, I think, by Longstreet House, because I have a copy of them.
Oh, really?
Yes, I've seen a reprint.
And I have the Morningside edition of it from the 1970s.
Oh, it might be Morningside I have then.
Yeah, but the key is that all the text for this and all the text for the others, I mean the reports going up to 1935, 1933, I guess, with a couple of years missing, were compiled by the lads, I think, or somebody, and they're on the GDG. So I stole them all from both of them legally. Again, they're up for everybody to see. Put them in a Word doc, and I have them together, and I can search for everything at once on one Word doc.
Nice.
And maybe someday, if you hold a contest, I'll share that Word doc
That
with
would
one
be
of your
great.
listeners.
That would be great. What about us? And then one of the listeners.
I said one of your listeners. No. Yeah. It's something I'll consider. Let's see how this goes today. I use it all the time.
Okay, good.
Cool.
So roads. Keep going with the roads. So now they build the roads. Obviously, I'm assuming that they've acquired more property as the roads are being built, right? Because you can't, if you're going to get like where Reynolds was killed, you've got to get to it. And so they're not getting the whole area that we're talking about.
Yeah.
That we know now around there. We're just getting that one little spot. So how are they getting to it initially?
And Tim might have something to say about this. So first of all, they're building the avenues as they can, and they plan avenues even before they have the land. Note that in every report, this one is 1898. It always starts with military avenues. It's the first thing, it's the first section of every report, at least from 1893 to 1904, and I believe beyond there. And it says things like, since the last report, Crawford Avenue has been completed, leading northward from the Devil's Den through the Valley of Death. Then there are inventories about how long these roads are, where they went. And the best example of this, though, is when they put Confederate Avenue, now called West and South Confederate Avenues, they laid it out into 7 sections, and they could do the first and second sections, near McMillan's Woods and everything like that. And then they could do sections 4, 5, 6, and 7 that go from, say, the Mississippi Memorial on all the way to Little Round Top. They laid those out, but those sections in the middle, were holdouts, and there was a speculation company keeping the land, and they were very frustrated and wanted to start condemnation proceedings. This thing reads like a villain in a hero novel as well. This it's perfect for this podcast, right?
Yeah.
These competing, commercialization and preservation or memorialization forces that still either work together or, combat each other to this day.
Huh.
And there's one thing I think we should just mention for the listeners, because we didn't really talk about this, but we have the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association.
Right.
That goes to 1895. In 1893, they formed the Gettysburg National Military Park Commission, which is a federal government entity, and appointed are 3, what do we call
commissioners.
them? The 3 commissioners, 2 from the Northern Army, 1 from the Southern Army. And this goes along with other battlefield commissions that are formed at the same time. Chickamauga, Chattanooga, Vicksburg, eventually Shiloh, and Antietam. I forgot one, didn't I?
Yeah, you totally did.
Okay. Well, But these are formed at the same time. And what happens is in 1895, the GBMA hands over its holdings to the Gettysburg National Military Park Commission.
Okay.
So it goes from a group, the land at Gettysburg that had been purchased goes from a group of Northern veterans to the federal government. And then every year, the federal government spends money on putting in new roads, putting in interpretive markers, making rules about what you can do on the battlefield, some of them related to the commercialism that was occurring at the same time.
Speed limits and everything like that.
Yeah.
Let me just say that.
Bicycles.
Yeah. And where you could put up your camera and charge money for it. For real.
I'm sure.
The commission's first office was in where the Lincoln statue is at the Gettysburg Library, now on Baltimore Street. By the way. I'd like to say you could still go in that building. Tim's looking at me sideways like maybe I'm wrong.
I think it was on the first headquarters is on Chambersburg Street.
Crap. I can
And then
swear they kept
eventually
rooms
they
there
moved
first.
to the library building.
But the library was once the
gonna
post
read
The
all
office,
library
right?
is not built till the federal. It was called the Federal Building.
The federal
It
building.
was built in 1913. So,
I'm going to read while you were
Okay,
talking.
but then the park also. Don't forget the park has a building at on the battlefield that still
storage unit.
stands, a storage unit for their roller, their steamroller building.
There's like 5 pictures of the steamroller. They're so
That's so
proud of
cool.
this thing, and they're all in this book here.
You got pictures of the steamroller in there?
Let me find it real
Underestimate the steamroller.
Steamroller.
Because it's one of those old-fashioned ones, so it's probably really
And
goofy
a couple
looking.
things about the roads
Yeah.
that Gary, since we're touching on roads, because, the roads are built on the lines of battle.
Right.
And a lot of the veterans are getting older, and, there's this attitude among Civil War battlefields early on, not just Gettysburg, that if we're trying to interpret something, if something's important, let's build a road on it.
Right.
And if it's more important, let's build a parking lot on it
Yes. Let's cover it
so
up
we
with
can
blacktop.
interpret it.
Yes.
And so you get these roads run along the Confederate line of battle, and they run along the Northern line of battle. And I know some people today tend to be like, wow, they destroyed the area where the battle was fought by putting a parking lot on top of it. And, but you have to understand when they were being put in and why they were being put in. So the roads themselves are kind of like memorials.
So, and then Hancock Avenue is interesting to me because, and I'm not really sure exactly how this all went, but you mentioned Webb and Harrow before. When were those taken out?
Webb, I wrote
Webb
on.
was 1991, I think.
Yeah.
90 or 91.
Yeah.
I drove on it.
Oh, so
Yeah,
just
I was
before
gonna
I
say,
started
yeah.
coming here is when they were taken out.
Because you were about to come here.
Because they knew.
Yeah.
They
I
knew.
think-
They
I
said a
think
couple of years, this
Har-
kid's going to take a field trip. We got to get this
Harrow
out.
Avenue and Meade Avenue, which ran from the Tonytown Road up to Hancock Avenue
Yes,
by the Meade
that's
statue.
another one.
Those 2 roads were taken out, if I remember, in the 1970s, maybe the late 60s, early 1970s.
Now, why? Did they have a good reason, or
As it appears as if, as time went by, they, the National Park Service thought to themselves, well, maybe these avenues are intrusive, and maybe by tearing them out, we can restore to more of its Civil War appearance.
Kind of like decluttering.
Yeah, decluttering. There you go.
Decluttering avenues.
So Hancock, though, you used to go the opposite way. The traffic patterns have
I
changed
did
too.
that too.
In
Yeah.
19 until 1986. Somebody just corrected me on a date recently. Was that you, Gary?
Probably.
Okay. So until the 1980, around 1986, it was one way. I could be wrong. Could be 88. It was one way south Hancock.
Yeah, I think that was me because I drove on it on my first trip in 1988.
Okay.
Okay.
And then the Park Service, they were big into this thing at some point called man, it's been so long since I talked about this. But
Steamroller?
no, the chronological battlefield.
Okay.
Where they wanted
yeah.
the battlefield to be more chronological, and they
Right.
felt by going south on Hancock Avenue, and people were at the visitor center, first thing they did was ride down Hancock Avenue and talk about picket charge. No,
Right. It makes no sense.
We can't be doing that.
Of course.
So, I have a whole story about that, but let me mention this because I'm just worried that in this first part of the show we need to get all these things in.
Right. Go ahead.
The Gettysburg National Military Park Commission runs the battlefield and it's a federal park from 1895 when they take over the holdings of the GBMA until 1933 when the lands are handed over to the National Park Service, which of course had already been founded and had existed for many years. And the interesting thing that I like to express to people about the Gettysburg National Military Park is that the National Park Service usually steps in, creates a park where there was no park before, and then they run and interpret the park. In Gettysburg, the park already existed, and all the roads were already put in, all the monuments were already here, and then it was handed over to the National Park Service. So from 1933 until the present day, the National Park Service manages the battlefield as we know it. The other thing I want to mention that I think that people should understand, it's not like the GBMA run by the locals or the GBMA run by the veterans or the War Department run by the Park Commission or the National Park Service running the battlefield. It's not like one of them ran it better than the other one. It's just like every time a different organization runs it, it's run
differently.
Naturally,
yeah, sure,
right?
yeah.
And I think that's important to know because I get like if I say something negative about the way the National Park Service is doing something, sometimes people are like, "Well, you must have really liked it when the War Department were in the battlefield." Oh no!
So I wasn't even alive.
I was really mad then.
But when you read about some of the rules the commission had on the battlefield, you're like, "Wow!"
Like what? You got some examples?
The commission?
You did mention something about the bicycles.
Bicycles,
what was there?
yeah.
You weren't allowed to ride bicycles on battlefield roads?
Remember.
You weren't allowed to ride them at all back then, you're saying?
Yeah, I think there was a period, but you have to go, or tour guides, a lot of the rules to me come down to tour guides because I'm a tour
And
guide.
the guides were established under the War Department.
But during the War Department years, tour guides had to follow a certain route. And they had people like timing when tour guides went from one place to another.
God.
And a tour guide would be cited because they didn't ride down Meade Avenue on their tour.
Oh, really?
But I think a lot of that had to do with they thought guides were shorting people of what they should see.
Right,
they told you what to do on the tour instead of just letting you go on the tour with the people. But I guess what I'm saying though is that over the years there has been different people that think that different things about the battle are important and they're interpreted, and even the placement of monuments in the avenues are constructed in a different way based upon the people who are in the management of the battlefield at that time, which is fascinating to me.
Well, and then also parts of some monuments are not necessarily placed exactly where they fought, but kind of where the property was available to them at the time they placed. Is that correct?
This gets to something you were saying, and I think we were talking about this recently when you talked about us talking about something. Reynolds Avenue.
Yes, we're getting close to what we were talking about there.
The Reynolds Avenue they purchased the GBMA and they purchased a strip of land from the Hagerstown Road up to the Chambersburg Pike and then north of the Chambersburg Pike and over the railroad, unfinished railroad cut and towards the Peace Light, where we call the Peace Light area now. And they only owned a strip of land on both sides of the road.
Right.
And so when monuments were to be erected to the position where the troops fought, the monuments had to go on the strip of land owned by the GBMA, regardless if that unit fought at that location or ever had troops positioned on that location.
And let me jump in because I've been waiting for this one here. If you had to put it near the road, okay, and then you liked that people could see your monument from the road, when they moved the road, they sometimes, such as with John Burns and others, they moved the monuments. When they placed the first monument, they may have said, on this place, X and Y happened. Your brave colonel breathed his last. And then they moved the monument, okay, because, it can't be far away from the road. That makes no sense. There's going to be a fence there. They can't visit it. So then they're going to move monuments. So this is something we don't even have time to get into. And another thing creepy Uncle Timmy turned me on to early was he's just looking at me like you guys are all cracking up, but I say things like this all the time. But, that there are scores, if not hundreds, scores of moved monuments on the battlefield.
There have to be, right?
I'm sure there's at least 100. You know.
So John Burns, 14th Brooklyn. Who else?
You mean
my
moved
God.
in that instance?
Moved. Anyway.
Well, I mean, think about this. Like when they put the railroad bridge, there was a railroad bridge on Reynolds Avenue.
That's another good one.
And
yeah.
that bridge has been at least 3 times over the years replaced with another bridge. And not this current bridge, but the bridge before it, they built a huge mound and they moved I guess they moved 6 monuments slightly in some
when
cases.
they moved the cyclorama, again, when they rebuilt it, they moved War Department tablets around. The 5th Main on Little Round Top has been moved. Some of the battery markers around the battlefield have been moved.
there's lots
For
of
various reasons.
For various, and it's not just one reason.
A lot of them have been moved because they got more money. The 91st Pennsylvania Monument that now sits on Little Round Top at the rock carving place where Weed and Hazlitt fell. Used to sit out where the larger monument to the 91st Pennsylvania now stands because they got $1,500, and that's what $1,500 bought you. So they moved the other one, and there are monuments that used to sit at Devil's Den to say the 99th Pennsylvania that is now at the angle where they got more money and put a nicer one at Devil's Den. So
with 93rd PA, didn't they have one up on?
First thing I ever
there.
wrote about, yeah.
Oh, yeah?
So 93rd
I love that
PA was
one.
originally in the Valley of Death on Weikert's Lane, and then $1,500 bought them a much bigger monument. They moved their little monument. They took their big one and put it there, but that necessitated slicing the rock in half,
yes.
and therefore the rock carving on it.
But you can still see the carving on the rock under the monument itself, and then also the discarded pieces of the boulder. There's still, you can go and look at that.
Now, you would
Peering
not
through the
know,
tall
you have
grass.
no idea knowing how happy Gary and I were when we discovered the remnants of that stone.
That was in 1992.
In thick woods.
Oh, it was wooded then.
Thickly wooded, remember?
Yes, and I remember, where's the other pieces? And what you find is that, people don't move heavy stuff very far.
No, it's all there.
People
It's
even
true.
move little light stuff.
Yeah.
Not
No,
very
I
far.
stumbled on that a couple of years ago by accident myself, and because I'd never gone up there. And I was walking around, and I just happened to notice, I think the word corps or something. I forget what it was.
6th Corps, 3rd Division, 3rd Brigade.
I don't remember which word it was that I noticed on one of the discarded pieces, and I started looking around, and then I looked it up, and I was like, oh, wow, that's cool.
Okay, so hold on, let me jump
Yeah,
in.
go
'cause
ahead.
That whole time, one thing, I told you to get this book, but the worst part about it
No
is that
index.
there's no index or page numbers. and all the reports are up front, and then there's 300 pages of pictures.
Oh, so you gotta look.
200. So you just have to assume roughly which year you're in and find it. It took me all that time to find it. So here is I give you, not the best picture, but the Parks Steamroller. And if I ever say anything that way, it's because it's the Tim Smith presentation. Say something fast and then slow down for emphasis. The Parks Steamroller. Okay?
It's silly looking.
And then I'm also going to show you, because I marked it this time. By the way, I lost my page once. Oh, not there. The War Department Maintenance Shed. This thing is still there, of course. They still use
Steamroller building.
Yeah, so and that door in the middle, I believe, is where they parked the steamroller.
in the maintenance shed.
Yeah, that gives it more reverence. I
I'm
remember
gonna
what is it,
adopt
the
that.
trough rock. You know?
Down by the Devil's Den.
Here we are at we haven't been here before. Here we are at Battery Dancler. Not that you've been there.
No, I
it's
have
not
not
in
been
Adams
there.
County, so Tim hasn't
That's
been there.
funny. Okay.
So I
all
love
right.
the stuff about the roads.
Yeah,
but
me
let me
too.
mention one more thing because I know you're going to break.
Well, we got to finish first, so let's go ahead. What do you got?
Now, during this whole time that we're talking about the history of the creation of the Gettysburg National Military Park,
Right.
and how it was run over the years, there's something else, and that's the story of the local community and the efforts to commercialize the area around the battlefield. And we might even say commercialize the battlefield. And, I think over the years, there's been areas that people considered historic, but then right next to them, there's areas that aren't so historic.
Yes.
And so there's been a battle between what should we preserve, what should we not preserve, what should we allow to be developed, what should we allow people to do to make money off of the visitors who are coming to see the area that's historic. And it goes from things like the Gettysburg Springs Hotel, which was presented originally as a hotel to help bring visitors to the battlefield and to help preserve the battlefield by bringing people's interest into the area. But then it ended up in a money-making scheme, and it was a Springs Hotel Company that was made up largely of investors from New York City and Philadelphia that purchased the land at Pickett's charge and then tried to sell it at an exorbitant rate to the federal government that resulted in Confederate Avenue not being completed for many years. So, you get these things that are well-meaning that turn into things that are more self-serving. And towers, like, for instance, we got the wooden tower on East Cemetery Hill,
Right.
and then eventually you have the National Tower in the 1970s, where it's a 300-foot tower with an elevator, to supposedly teach us about the battle, but ends up in a blight that plays incredibly loud country music.
Country music, I
on the
remember that.
battlefield
Yes,
to try
yes.
to annoy the park into buying it at exorbitant rates so the investors can make money.
But guides loved using it to point it out, though.
I love
Well,
it.
it's a
Cemetery
great-
Hill,
yeah.
we all used it.
Yeah. So, I mean,
We would use it coming into town down the Carlisle Road. We would see it. And we're like, oh, we're almost there, because back then we didn't have GPS.
Yeah, when I lived in Carroll County when I was a kid, and there was a hill near my house, I could stand on the hill and look and see the tower.
Yeah, see, now nobody knows where Gettysburg is because the tower's gone, because all those NIMBYs.
So, and then, there's things like the Gettysburg Electric Railway, the trolley that I think Gary wanted to talk about. There's
Yes.
an amusement park on the backside of Little Round
So
Top.
real quick, so Gary's holding up a picture there of one of the trolleys. Which one is that? Is
I
that
think it's the
Hancock?
Howard, isn't it?
Oh, the Howard.
Is it the Sykes? Let's see. Hold
So
on.
from 1893
The Howard.
to 1916, the Gettysburg Electric Railway, under different names and different owners, was under operation on the battlefield. And basically, it was designed for tourists. A guy from Hummelstown, Pennsylvania, got some investors together, and they purchased land near public land around the battlefield, put in a trolley track, and they charged people money to drive from the town. And you could get off the train station, walk over to the trolley. It was very close to the train station. And you could ride around parts of the battlefield on the trolley. There was even a tour guide on the trolley. The tour guide would tell you about the battle as you're riding around. It might drop you off at Devil's Den, where you could go to William Tipton's amusement park and throw back a couple beers and go to the dancing hall he had there. You could go to the backside of Little Round Top, where there was a little amusement park.
Was there a brothel?
Later.
World War I, and you know where the girls supposedly came from.
I don't want to know.
Chambersburg?
No.
No.
It said the girls are coming from York Springs.
I think we should look it up, 'cause I think
It's
we
in
have
the
it in the
book. It's in the book, and I remember the
Really?
girls come down and poor York Springs.
Oh, yeah, really?
As if they only came from one town, but that's what it said.
York Springs girl. Well, what was so great about York Springs girls back then, or were they
so
not?
not good.
Oh,
You're working
was this
on
a criticism,
a
or was
brothel
this?
on the hill.
I think anytime you're going to have visitors, and, you're going to have brothels. I mean,
Yeah.
There's a great story about there being a brothel for a short time in Lee's headquarters.
What?
There's a brothel in Lee's headquarters for a time. That's pretty
Yes.
well documented.
Was there really the Mrs. Thompson house?
Yeah.
Wow.
Early
That's-
1900s.
and might
I
be
mean,
one
that's
of the
a
reasons
small
why-
brothel.
I mean, Tim's theory is actually, hey, you could fit a few beds in there.
I mean, I
easy.
guess.
You've been to Amsterdam?
Yeah, but it's
not that I would know from inside.
No,
but
I mean,
those
I'd-
rooms are small from the window.
I've never been to Amsterdam.
Okay, in any
I'm
case,
sorry.
So Tim's theory, in part, and I think it's reasonable, and I don't think it's totally unfounded either. I think he has some reason to believe this, is that, Lee's headquarters was a brothel for a while. Guides stopped pointing to it. The Park Service says, we don't want that, or the War Department, and Lee's headquarters became, a motel with cabins and cottages, and then became a real deal motel. Its preservation seemed to never be contemplated, and I don't know if that was entirely because it was the rebel leaders' headquarters, but rather maybe the brothel had something to do with it.
Maybe they didn't want to get rid of the girls. Crazy time. So okay, but the
what
the
the
trolley.
point is, yeah.
Well, let's go
Go
over because people are very interested in the trolley. So let's get a little bit of that. That's a private company, right?
Yeah.
And where does it start? Where does it, when you were to go and...
The trolley originated from a trolley house and an electric plant. Keep in mind, it's an electric trolley. So there is a track that runs around the battlefield with poles and electric wires above it. And there's a little thing coming out of the top of the trolley that hooks to the wire that is electrified. So there's a power plant on North Washington Street in the town of Gettysburg, and it starts there.
Where was that power plant? Was that right by where Agway is?
Into Napoli, what's it called?
Antica Napoli.
There you go.
Delicious pizza, New York style pizza.
Right
in case
there.
anybody from New York wants pizza here, go there.
Yes. So it's right at the railroad track in North Washington Street, just a little north of the 7-Eleven.
Okay. It was like a big...
It's a big building.
It was a big, really fancy looking building,
It also brought
right?
electricity to the town. So they built an electric plant, they had an electric trolley, and it ran through the town, and you could go several, on any given day. I don't know which street it ran down, but it runs down Baltimore Street.
The trolley, you're saying?
Yeah.
So the trolley actually goes through town.
Yeah.
Like the center of the road.
The streets of town. Right on the side, but right down the street.
Oh, okay.
And it runs over down Baltimore Street past the cemetery. It ran through the bottom of what is now Evergreen Cemetery. It ran right by the edge of Evergreen Cemetery at the time.
Oh, wow.
Over to the Tawnytown Road. It rode around Ziegler's Grove, and it ran right across the fields in front of the wall at the angle.
In front of the wall.
But, for a while.
On the Confederate side of the wall is what you're saying.
It has a two-way route. So let's say you go over to the Emmitsburg Road first. Let's go that way. And then it goes down the Emmitsburg Road to the Peach Orchard. And then it goes around the Peach Orchard through around the wheat field and around the back of Devil's Den. And it went right across the front of Little Round Top and up onto Little Round Top. And then for the early part of its existence, then it ran from Little Round Top down across Hancock Avenue and then across to the angle. It was, but
when you say up Little Round Top, like where?
Let me put it this way. It's complicated because it goes up to Little Round Top to the intersection of Sykes Avenue and the Wheatfield Road, where Round Top Museum was later.
Yep.
But then the plan was to run the line all the way down the Union line, but that never happened. There's various reasons. But they did for a while have a contract with the Gettysburg-Harrisburg Railroad that had a railroad spur on the backside of Little Round Top. And then they could run the trolley on the track across Hancock Avenue and out past to the Cadore Farm and back up the Emmitsburg Road into town. And then it went along Washington Street also. So it was a big circular route. But it was intended to go right across the front of the angle, but the 72nd Pennsylvania, which had been in a fight with the GBMA about the placement of the monument, was able to stop that short part of the route. And they weren't able to keep their contract with the Gettysburg-Harrisburg Railroad Company. So for most of its existence, the trolley went to Little Round Top, turned around, and they didn't really physically turn the trolley around. They just take it. They took the steering wheel from one end of the trolley and went to the back and put it in. It went backwards and then went back across the Little Round Top and Devil's Den back out to the Wheatfield Road and down.
Wow.
But it's very complicated.
That must have been cool to see.
But when it was put in 1893, the interesting thing about it was they cut a 30-foot swath through some of the most sacred area of our battlefield, and it ran within feet of monuments that had been dedicated just a few years earlier. And when you read the newspapers articles about it, the amount of negative publicity that surrounded this thing is just incredible. How
long did it last?
Well, the problem was the veterans couldn't do anything about it because it was kind of done. A lot of it was done kind of secretly. They didn't know what was happening. By the time people got the idea it was happening, it was already built. They immediately tried to take it to court, and it went through several different court cases. And 3 years after it was constructed, in 1896, it went to the United States Supreme Court, and they finally decided that the trolley should be condemned. But even though the United States government won the case in 1896, they didn't purchase the trolley until 1916.
Okay.
So even though they won the court case, they allowed it to operate for 20 years. Is that right? 20 years before they actually bought and paid the money to the trolley company. And by that time, the trolley company had sold several times, and it was more about investors knowing that eventually they would get money. So it ran from 1893 to 1916.
Huh.
So I think I may have to issue an apology to some of the girls of York Springs. So it appears, I know I read this somewhere, by the way, but according to an officer at Camp Colt in 1918, that was, of course, the World War I tank training camp on the field of Pickett's Charge, was talking about how he was talking to Colonel Nicholson, John P. Nicholson, the longtime commissioner of the Gettysburg National Military Park. He said, the condition described to me by Colonel Nicholson is certainly very deplorable. He says the resort is frequented by prostitutes, not only from Gettysburg, but who come in from on excursions from the neighboring towns of York, Harrisburg, Chambersburg, and Emmitsburg. Seems like every town but York Springs.
Yeah.
So you're right, Tim. These excursions bring with them quantities of beer and whiskey, which they give or sell to the soldiers. As a result of the debauchery on the grounds, the immediate surroundings, and the resort itself, part of them lying on the battlefield reservations, are used for association purposes. On a single evening, over 50 couples were detected and driven from hiding places behind tablets, monuments, rocks, and trees of the reservation. On one occasion, his officers found over 300 empty beer bottles scattered around their various hiding places.
Wow. The good old days.
Me love you long, Tim.
Wow.
That was...
Long time. Me love you a long time.
That is... can you imagine that? That is so hard to imagine.
It is hard to imagine the
the
south
way it
end
is
of the
today.
Gettysburg battlefield.
Now,
of course,
Because somebody mentioned an amusement park.
Yeah, I mean, so there was this fight between commercialization and preservation, shrine or amusement park. And Tim tells a story, sometimes about a woman he met, I believe, who lost her virginity in the big round top tower, which was around until 19 appropriately.
Oh, my.
19 what?
Wow.
69.
Really?
If I'm correct, Tim. Isn't that when they took that down?
Somewhere around there.
Oh, my God.
How about that? That's a lot of physical effort.
That is, I'd be exhausted by the time I got up there.
Yeah, you have to climb
Maybe
up.
that's the goal.
Yeah, you have to climb up the hill.
It's the
then you got to go
foreplay.
up the tower.
Oh, my God. Jeez.
After climbing Big Round Top.
Yeah.
Point.
Now, keep in mind that letter that Gary read that's in our Devil's Den book that we're somewhat proud of inserting in the book. It actually came to us from licensed battlefield guide Dave Weaver, and I was with him at the National Archives. He was doing research on Camp Colt.
Okay.
The World War I, camp for training soldiers that were being sent to Europe. So a lot of these guys were soldiers that were being trained here, and people from these other towns knew that. Eisenhower, who was in charge of the camp, had made specific requirements on the Gettysburg people that they weren't allowed to sell alcohol to the soldiers.
Right.
But the girls from Emmitsburg, especially, I remember there was a report about.
And I know York Springs was involved. I'll have to find it. I'm sorry. I'm only apologizing temporarily.
Well, I mean, anything nefarious in Adams County.
Yeah, it's usually York Springs. Okay, so you mentioned, I guess we're going to have to go lightning round here. So you mentioned Camp Colt, World War I. Who are some people of note who were here at that time?
Well, I think you already mentioned Eisenhower.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Eisenhower really did a good job with trying to.
He was the commandant.
Yeah, trying to keep these things, under.
Keep everything zipped up.
And dealing with the Spanish flu, by the way.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
He seemed to have done a good job working with the town council and wearing masks and everything like that.
Yeah.
Oh, my God, am I causing trouble on the podcast?
Careful.
All I'm saying is what Eisenhower did and the town, and they preserved some lives.
Right.
But then, I think today when people talk about commercialism and the battlefield, they think of it, we're talking about early on, with some of the efforts. But then, what really happens in the study of the American Civil War, and I'm sure we're all affected by it, is the 100th anniversary of the Civil War in the 1960s. That's when a lot of books came out on it, books that I looked at in my public library when I was younger, like Bruce Catton's Centennial History of the American Civil War. And there was a huge influx of visitors into Gettysburg during the Centennial in the early 1960s. And what happened was motels sprang up everywhere on the Emmitsburg Road, and so
in front of the Peace Light.
Yeah, the Peace Light
Pinchgut.
So there was places.
That's
There were
right.
places that had seen some
Stuckies.
popularity, but then as we approached the Centennial, just more and more tourists. Almost the motels were so up and down the Emmitsburg Road, they were on top of the area that we were trying to interpret.
That's another thing that's amazing to me. I just can't imagine all of that. I think the last when I started coming here, there was what was the one right next to Pickett's Buffet?
Home Sweet Home.
Home Sweet
I
Home.
confess I stayed there. You remember that?
And
Dutchie,
the
what was
owner,
his name?
Duffy.
Duffy.
He was a friend of mine, and I, used to hang out with him.
Yeah.
It was his aunt's. I think it was from like the 1940s.
I mean, as a tourist, I would wake up and open the window, and there was Pickett's Storage.
Yeah, how cool is that?
It was cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
I liked the tower. I'm glad it's gone, but I liked it. I'm glad the Home Sweet Home is gone.
Right.
I don't blame people for using these facilities while they're around.
Of course, while they're here. Yeah, yeah.
Now, that's the other thing about commercialization. I think no one would argue that you have to have McDonald's. You have to have a place for people to eat.
Of course.
Does it have
of
to be
course.
there, though, is what
right,
they
that's
argue
the
about,
problem.
right?
It's the amount of.
But that's a
commercialization.
holdover from the old days when all these other things were all the way down the Emmitsburg Road. Like, that's just the one part that we haven't grabbed yet.
There was at
But-
least 60 structures on the Emmitsburg Road between town and, say, South Confederate Avenue and that environment, or the bathroom.
60?
Yes, 60.
60
Which-
non-historic structures.
Yes, and I would say 40 of them were right around Pinchgut, where Seminary, Warfield Ridge crosses the Emmitsburg
That
Road.
blows my mind. I can't imagine that. I'm so glad that is all gone.
And the trust bought the last two. Sorry, everybody. I work for the American Battlefield Trust. Purchased, along with our partners, the last two on the Emmitsburg Road in 2014 or 15.
And then there's also the area around Lee's headquarters. I remember I stayed there when it was was that Quality Inn? That was?
Yeah,
I think?
Larson's. I mean,
Yeah.
it was a beloved hotel. People
Sure.
loved Larson.
Well, yeah, because you can come out and look out the window, and there's the first day's
The
battlefield.
Appalachian Brewing Company. I don't know if anybody says the new location is worse than the old one.
The new ABC?
Yeah, everybody. I mean, the new one is nice. It's beautiful.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
I don't think I was ever in the
Yeah.
old one.
Yeah, the old one.
I was. It was not, and I didn't like it there. But then with the new one, I think everything improved.
They got the beer garden out
The
there. Of course, there's a
beer
better
gar-
beer garden in town, right, Tim?
Yeah, the Farnsworth House.
Yes, Farnsworth House. That's right.
So I mean, commercialism and memorialization go hand in hand.
Yeah.
You can't have one without the other.
Correct.
You don't have visitors.
Right. What are they going to do when they come here to visit the battlefield? They have to eat. They have to sleep. Of course, you need both. But like we were saying, why does it have to be?
And that's one of the topics that
Certain places.
I'm fascinated with the rise and fall of the motels.
Yeah.
And I, for one, ever since I was young, I've collected postcards, and I collect postcards of the Lee Mead Inn or the Battlefield Hotel or the Blue Sky Motel, or there are just so many that come and go, and I think it's a natural process too. You
Sure.
build a motel. It doesn't last that long. It doesn't last
They're
for
cheap.
100 years. They're
Right.
built cheaply. They last 30, 40 years. And then, what are you going to do? They're
I'm waiting to
down.
see one go up for sale for very cheap, and I'm going to make studios out of
There
it.
are several of them.
That's what I'm gonna do.
If somebody wants to see what we're talking about, drive up the Harrisburg Road. From
Still there.
Gettysburg, right up.
Carlisle
I think
Road,
there's
too.
4 of them between here and Shriver's Corner. And the old Cleveland Hotel, which is, a few miles out of town on the left, just before you get to Shriver's Corner Road.
Yeah.
That looks like that's not going to be there much longer.
No.
Here's Matt's studios here. I think
Right down the Emmitsburg Road.
There you
right
go.
down the Emmitsburg Road
absolutely,
towards
south of the
Route
battlefield.
15. There's 2 or 3 of them still. But most of them are being used as rental units. You notice that? Like
Yeah,
housing.
people like long term. Yeah.
Well, you
yeah.
pass by them, you always wonder what's going on.
Oh,
there.
yeah. I know.
It's like
I'm
a
afraid to
David
go near
Lynch,
those places.
David Lynch situation.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
I think the history of commercialization is fascinating in the area.
It is. No, it's very fascinating. And then that constant tug of war between that and preservation. And I mean, the last one that I remember, the big one was the casino. 10 or 15 years ago.
First of all, casino at Round Top Park, by the way, the first battlefield casino. And then the big fight, of course, was, has been a couple of fights along the Emmitsburg Road.
And
Yeah.
I think sometimes people, especially locals maybe think, why does there have to be a battle between commercialism and preservation? And it's just a natural thing.
You need to eat. You need to pay your bills, so you got to work.
Totally.
Yeah. But
the trust works with developers all the time. We'd rather just work with them to try to get development either appropriate or not in the most sensitive areas.
Yeah.
But it's push and pull.
It's tough. It's got to be tough. I would get frustrated.
Yes.
So anyway, I thought that that's part of the history of the battlefield itself.
Yeah, that's part of it. Now we'll have to. There's a couple things that you guys talked about that are pretty interesting that I'd like to dive into further, maybe later on another episode. But we need to. Yeah, I know, Robbie. We got to. I have to use the gentleman's room. It's been 4 hours, and we're going to take a break. People need to listen. Okay, people need to listen to the commercials. They need to know who are responsible for bringing this wonderful show to you. So we're going to take a break. We'll be back with Tim and Gary. We're going to answer your questions. 6 questions length tonight. He's a 7-question length, and actually, if he goes with his normal, multiple questions per question, we're looking at 70 questions alone from Mike Lentz. So we're going to be here for a while. We're going to be here for a while, but there's...
I have told you there's no time for that.
We'll be right back.
You've heard us promote various ways that you can help us keep the show going. But one way we haven't pushed too much yet is our sutlery at addressinggettysburg.com/shop. And that's a shame, because we have designs over there by talented artists like Ty DeWitt of 1863 Designs and Mike Stretch of the Heritage Depot. So now we're promoting it. Buying shirts, hoodies, mugs, and other items from our sutlery not only helps us keep the lights on, but it also helps guys like Ty and Mike, and it helps spread the word about the show every time you wear an item or sip from your mug. So please, head over to addressinggettysburg.com/shop and grab some merch. You just might find the perfect Christmas gift for the Gettys nerd in your family. That's addressinggettysburg.com/shop. Experience the magic of Christmas in Gettysburg. Stroll decorated streets on a festive walking food tour highlighting the sights, sounds, and unique tastes of this historic town. Enjoy stops at some of the best eateries, all while learning fascinating facts about early Christmas traditions. Admire the glittering lights, decorated storefronts, and our grand 30-foot Christmas tree in Lincoln Square, all adding to the ambiance of the most wonderful time of the year. Get started on Christmas shopping for your loved ones as we visit a few downtown stores that offer one-of-a-kind Christmas gifts. A perfect opportunity for any last-minute gift hunting you need to get done. Enjoy a private holiday tour through the Shriver House with dessert in the Shriver Saloon. This special tour will transport you back in time to Christmases of yesteryear. So make a new Christmas tradition with your family and friends. The Christmas Tastes and Traditions food tour promises to be delicious, delightful, and decidedly local. Go to SavorGettysburgFoodTours.com and book your tour today. That's SavorGettysburgFoodTours.com.
Think outside the bus and let family-owned Gettysburg Tours take you on a cycling journey across the picturesque and historic Gettysburg battlefield. There's no better way than by bicycle to gain a feel for the terrain of the battlefield. Slow enough to see it all, yet fast enough to do it all. Follow the route of Union troops entering the fray as you ride to the site of the first shots of this epic 3-day battle. Feel the drama as you put yourself in the position of a Confederate soldier just before he steps off to make Pickett's charge. Take a stand with the heroic Colonel Chamberlain on the slopes of Little Round Top, just before you view the fields of honor beneath you from its summit. All of our guides are officially licensed by the National Park Service. So don't get a sore neck trying to see out of your car, and saddle up with Gettysburg Tours for a 360-degree view of America's most important piece of real estate. Gettysburg Tours. Think outside the bus. Go to gettysburg.com or call 717-752-7752 to book a battlefield experience you will never forget.
Have you noticed our revamped website at addressinggettysburg.com? Well, that's the fine work of a man named Mike Stretch, and he also redid our logo for us. Both of them I originally designed, and both of them were originally horrible, but now they're nice, and that's all thanks to Mike. And Mike has an awesome t-shirt company called Heritage Depot. There you'll find great designs based on Gettysburg and the Civil War with t-shirts and other types of merchandise. So go to heritage-depot.com and spruce up your Gettys Nerd wardrobe. That's heritage-depot.com. Our favorite bookstore in Gettysburg is For the Historian, located at 42 York Street. It's because they have the best selection of Civil War books in Gettysburg, both new and used. And online, they have even more to choose from. And if the Civil War isn't your thing, that's not a problem. This is For the Historian, after all. They cover history from the ancient world to the 21st century with a strong selection of World War II and American Revolution books. It's astounding how many thousands of titles from Osprey, Savas Beatty, UNC Press, and more they have in their store. And that's because, well, they have a warehouse too. And that's where they keep all the books that are available online at forthehistorian.com. And folks, if you go to forthehistorian.com now and order books until you're blue in the face, be sure you mention that you heard about them on Addressing Gettysburg in the Note to Seller box, and they will refund your shipping costs. And if you prefer to stop by when you're in town, well, you could do that too. Just mention Addressing Gettysburg at checkout, and they'll take 20% off the retail price of your item. So go to forthehistorian.com, or stop by 42 York Street, or you can call them at 717-685-5207. That's forthehistorian.com or 717-685-5207.
You're listening to the Addressing Gettysburg podcast.
All right, and we are back, ladies and gentlemen, with our questions. And I know this is a very long show for you all, but I know you all love it because Tim and Garry are fun guests to have, and you love listening to them. But if I can just take another moment here, we have a patron who is here, Tim Matthews. And Tim, you have a special request from Tim Smith. What is that there?
May I stand up?
Yeah, here. Yeah.
Did he say, may I stand up?
May I stand up?
Wow.
Look at this.
Tim, could you please autograph my shirt for me?
Oh, well, put it right
Oh
here.
my God,
There
there
you
you
go.
go. Somehow.
Okay, there we go. All right, he's Tim Smith is autographing.
Thank you very much.
Wow, that is a first.
Someday to be in some archive somewhere.
You can't watch that because that might come out now.
You can donate it to the Adams County Historical
There you go.
Society.
Very good.
I have a very similar shirt with Ray Lewis. He signed it for me. So.
Well, this is probably more valuable, actually.
I think Ray Lewis's chest was a little firmer than mine.
All right. So, of course, you know that you have to be a patron if you want to submit questions when we do Ask A Gettysburg guides. You go to patreon.com/addressinggettysburg and become one. And one of our patrons, Roy Mead, is going to start us off here today. He says, "Hi, guys. Since I've been coming to Gettysburg, I always hear at least once about the awful trade that the Park Service made with the Gettysburg School District. What was the deal?
Wow.
How much land did the park trade, and what did it gain?"
Wow, that's interesting.
That's interesting because that's not what I expected him to say.
No. I thought he was going the railroad cut way with that. And, I don't know if he's been on my
Well, that's another one. Go ahead and talk about that,
my
too.
walking tour of East Cemetery Hill that I did a few years ago, I highlighted that. And basically, we're talking about where the Gettysburg Middle School is located. And at one time, the battlefield, the Gettysburg National Military Park Commission, part of the battlefield, had purchased the area where the Gettysburg Middle School is, and they ran all the way to the edge of the town. And for somebody who's interested in seeing where this land he's talking about is, if you go along Wall Alley and up near the alley behind Stratton Street, behind the tennis courts associated with the Gettysburg Elementary School, there is still the pipe and stone fencing along the edge of the boundary. So the park owned everything to the town, and in the 1940s, I believe it was, a large chunk of that land was given to the Gettysburg School District, and now the Gettysburg Middle School sits on that piece of property. And in exchange for that trade, there was another piece of land a little bit closer to Culp's Hill, at the base of East Cemetery Hill, that was transferred over to the park. So the park made a land swap, and then after they swapped the land, the Gettysburg Middle School bought the land, and actually part of the was it the Kefauver Elementary School, I think it was called back there, was on the property of the transfer also. So it's interesting that over the years there have been land swaps and trades, or the park selling off land. And I guess the disturbing part of that in the park's history is that, you fight so hard to buy a piece of land and preserve it as the area where men fought. And then, someone decides that, you know what, I know they purchased this land for preservation, but let's trade it back and give it up. And it's just the whole thing. And
now, what was the deal with the railroad cut?
Before we move on to the railroad cut, I want a little context, if I may, because what the government found when they started making national military parks, Chickamauga, Chattanooga, they realized, oh my God, this is going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to be really hard to maintain, and maybe we don't need all that. And that's when they came up with the Antietam plan. That is to buy avenues through battlefields that you could memorialize and at least mark the lines of battle. And of course, that's where the trust picks up, where we're trying to buy the rest of it, or the rest of the important parts at that point. But please note that Gettysburg is far from alone on this. Petersburg used to own, I don't know how many hundreds, if not thousands of more acres that they have deeded and ceded to the city of Petersburg. It was just too much for them to take care of. Vicksburg used to own a lot more of their lines, as especially go now what is south and southwest of the battlefield. They owned a lot more of that and chose to, divest themselves of that. Sometimes getting something in return, sometimes only relieving the maintenance burden. And even for us, although the trust has never, and I don't think will ever do this, Ed Bars told us when we're trying to go after one property where the battles of Gaines's Mill and Cold Harbor intersect, where, it was the most important unpreserved acreage of the Civil War is what we call it. He said, if you have to sell everything else you've ever saved to save this one, do it. Now we wouldn't do that, but I do understand the push-pull of somebody trying to gain something. So if I can segue that into the Park Service, at the railroad cut, the Park Service, owned this key land. The college wanted to solve a problem. And the Park Service wanted an easement on acreage that the college owned, because they knew the college was going to expand, and they since have, to be sure. Now, some of that ground had already been leveled. And what I'll say is, and I'll say that the Park Service is the trust's best partner, but this element of the Park Service worked with the college in secret, to get this deal done. And this was a big problem, and that bulldozer showed up when? Christmas Day or something like that, which is when it always happens. And it was to try to allow the college to work with the railroad to get trains off their campus so that people didn't have to cross the tracks to operate the business there, and in exchange for substantial easements, on the First Days Field north of town. Tim?
Oh, I was going to say that, I wanted to say something else, but 7.5 acres of land were transferred to the Gettysburg College. And if you looked at the plan ahead of time, it seemed good. There were people in the know who were at meetings that were discussing the boundary transfer, and the plan sounded good on paper. They were just going to move a railroad track from the middle of the Gettysburg College campus out to the edge of the college campus in the battlefield. But the railroad company wouldn't do it unless they put a switchback in that connected the east-west route with the north-south route, and that required substantial removal of part of Seminary Ridge, an area which was obviously significant during the battle.
And I don't think people understand the degree to which Seminary Ridge was simply removed in order to make this. And, it's so bad that the park apologized and everything like that, and that's why I can talk about it, because this was uncool.
There's a lot of things, there's a lot of interesting detail to it. But then there's the other, I was going to mention in the same vein, Antietam. Antietam probably has the most interesting case of this when you in here in our area of this. But Antietam had this problem where the Hagerstown Turnpike, probably the most significant feature on their battlefield, runs right by the Dunker Church. Heavy
Dunker
fighting.
Church and Burnside Bridge, maybe.
Good. Burnside Bridge.
Cornfields, it's in the top 10.
Yeah, heavy fighting on the morning of September 17th. But traffic became an increasing problem because of the heavy traffic between Hagerstown and Sharpsburg. So they made a deal with the state of Maryland, and they gave the state of Maryland a huge amount of their land, and they built modern Route 65, is it 65, on top of what was West Confederate or Confederate Avenue. Antietam had a Confederate Avenue, much like Gettysburg had a Confederate Avenue. So the state of Maryland got Confederate Avenue, bulldozed it, put a highway on top of it, simply to get traffic off of the Hagerstown Turnpike. Now, it did work.
Yeah.
And, we have less traffic on the original Hagerstown Turnpike. But in exchange, we gave up a huge section of the battlefield.
This is what battlefield stewards have to,
you got to juggle that.
You have to balance access and visitation with preservation.
Now, I would say this. In the case of Antietam, they did this through a series of public hearings and very publicly.
So they did it in the light of day.
And then the thing that was concerning about the Seminary Ridge Railroad cut was it was done in secret with nobody knowing it.
How long ago was that?
1992?
90.
No, it was before. It was like 90, 91. I think it was Christmas 90.
We should know.
It went on 90.
That's why I asked.
It's in the Fighting the Second Civil War book.
All right. Chaplain Cox wants to know, who was more influential in the creation of the park? Sickles or John Nicholson or Tim Smith? That's right. That's what he put.
Good. Well, I would say this. Sickles had absolutely nothing to do with the preservation of the park. I get tired of that.
This whole damn battlefield is my monument.
Can I just get you saying
Let me suggest.
Sickles? Can I just get you doing that?
Sickles.
Do it one more time.
Oh, you want to record
I want to record it. Come on, nice and clean, please.
Sickles.
See, he's reluctant. I want a sound
you
bite,
want something.
and I don't have one.
Well,
He's like, I don't know if I'll do one.
So here's what
Creepy Uncle Timmy isn't going to be one?
Because he's afraid of another shirt coming out.
We could definitely do Creepy Uncle Timmy.
Here's what I don't like.
We're not doing that. Yeah, go ahead.
Sickles is the figurehead. It's called the Sickles Bill.
Yeah.
And Sickles is the one who the bill is named after. I refuse to acknowledge that Sickles had anything to do with the preservation of the battlefield.
Come on.
It was a done deal.
Come on. He must have done something.
And again, we're talking about the Sickles Bill is the bill that turns over the GBMA's holdings into the Gettysburg Battlefield, or I should say the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association's holdings into the Military Park Commission. So he doesn't create the battlefield. It's already there.
Right.
And then there's some other parts of the Sickle Bill, like a military base at Gettysburg. Do you know they're going to build a military base on the battlefield? There's some bad parts.
What we want to do is say, who's the preservation hero here? Just like, who's the hero of Little Round Top? Well, it's Warren, it's O'Rourke, it's Chamberlain, it's Vincent, it's Rice. It's all these people. And that's the case. It's McConaughey, it's Wills, it's Bachelder. But John Page Nicholson, because of the length of his tenure, alone, oversaw, and you can read the reports
and he was
on which pieces
again?
of land. So John Page Nicholson was the longtime commissioner of the Gettysburg National Military Park Commission. I think he was serving from roughly 1896. The original commissioner died almost right away. So from 1896 until like 1929 or something. I mean, he really oversaw the memorial period and the land acquisition from 800 acres to 2,800 acres or something like that. Some huge amount under his tenure. So it's him. I would say, I'll give Sickles a little bit more credit than Tim because I don't know how you couldn't. No matter what I said.
He just showed you how.
But yeah, you're right. That was a good roadmap. But, someone else would have done it. These things were happening.
Yeah.
We already had one for Chickamauga and Chattanooga. I mean, Gettysburg was going to come up soon.
Okay. Now, he's got another question here, and this is what Tim and I were arguing about a couple of weeks ago at the Farnsworth House. Have Tim and Garry changed their opinion on Scott Hartwig's location of the Harvest of Death photos yet?
No.
Wow.
And what do you mean yet? Hold
Yes,
on. Who
because
asked this again?
you're gonna Chaplain Cox.
Chaplain Cox. What do you mean yet?
Because he's been praying on it.
It's perfectly. It's every site is either perfectly right or perfectly wrong.
Oh, I don't want to get in this with you.
What do you mean yet? We've already determined it's impossible.
You have not determined it's impossible.
Yes, we have.
We're going to go out there one day when in 20 years when you retire and have time.
I don't enjoy this anymore.
Why don't you enjoy this? You have to prove it to me.
Why should I have to?
Because you haven't proven to me that Scott is wrong.
There are 20 videos out there.
You know what? I've seen the videos, and I see nothing that says
you can
he's
throw
wrong.
celery at him.
That's because
please do, because I'm starving.
I'll say,
just hand it to me.
Matt Gallery, you do not understand photo research. That is why people want to treat photo research like some sort of like a popularity contest, like for other historical things. Well, 60 people said this and only one said that. With photo research, all it takes is one thing to throw everything else out the window. And that's the case for the Jon Stewart, the Scott Hartwig, the John Cummings set.
First of all, I don't know what a comedian who used to host The Daily Show has to do with this. Listen.
He was the first one to come up with the Hartwig location.
No, I know.
And then, you know what I said to him was interesting about it? I said, tell me which one of the moving Scott Hartwig sites that you're talking about, then I'll tell you what's wrong with it.
John Cummings has stayed with the same one. I got 2 new HODs in the last week and a half.
Yeah, we got
2 new ones.
2 new ones.
And then they all think they're right. They all don't like to hear that they are. And then when they ask my opinion, then I tell it, and then they tell me how wrong I am. You know, and then they want me to prove it to them.
I got a question.
See, I run into the same problem when I try to convince people that the Pennsylvania Reserves won the Battle of Gettysburg. They don't want to hear it.
Crawford already did that for you.
I got a question. Next time, can you do more than just rinse these off? Because they taste a little dirty.
Well, I mean, it did fall on the floor after.
No,
actually, one of the big problems with people today is, among so many others, is people are too clean. We're all sanitizing our hands. So I'm helping your microbiome.
Thank you.
There's a little dirt
Thank you.
on
I
them.
appreciate that.
Kids don't play in the dirt anymore, and it's affecting us negatively.
No, it's fine. You know what? You're absolutely right. It's the Dwight Schrute method.
Note that mine were super clean. I was throwing you the dirt.
You know what I like to do? I think would be very interesting exercise.
Yeah.
Why don't we get like 5 of these guys in a room that all think they're right?
I would love to do this.
And let them argue with each other.
Yeah, all of them are sure they're right, and then other people come up with theories riddled with trouble as well, and then they're like, that theory sucks.
I'm curious. I have to
rewatch your video
because I don't know if this has ever happened or not. Has anybody ever actually gone out to any of those locations with like a legitimate wet plate photographer?
Me and Dave Wilson were talking about doing that.
Yeah, Gibson's done it.
Yeah,
Rob
Gibson had a site, and he went out there.
Okay. I had no idea if that had ever been done or not.
His site was impossible to start
and he
with.
thought his site was right.
He's looking at the sickles tree.
Okay.
I mean, that's it. I don't care what else you have. If the sickles tree is in it, and the sickles tree was there in 1863, and you can see it in the Gardner photos, I don't care if Gardner himself said this is where it was taken. It's not taken at that angle if the tree is in it. That's it. And that's what people don't like to hear. They don't like to hear that one thing can destroy their hours or months or years
Wait, are you
of
saying
work.
in the Harvest of Death photos, the sickles tree is in the Harvest?
No, what I'm saying is in Rob Gibson's theory of it, the one he was advancing that day, one of the angles had the sickles tree in it, and the sickles tree was there during the battle. No. That's it. It can't possibly work.
So Rob did that one photo down
in both directions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you know if there have been
where the Cummings has ever done it for his? He's done almost everything else. You know.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of
because I feel like that
things.
would make that has to make some kind of a difference because it's a different type of photography. There's different focal lengths.
But you got to know what lens you used.
Yeah, that's
you could
which
say
is
that,
true.
You know, when you find the right spot, you don't have to explain anything. It works. It looks like it.
Well,
it
so
matches with 1863 features, and that's it.
But how? Because we had Scott on to talk about it. It convinced me. It convinced a lot of the listeners. How is it that people can see it? What don't you see? Or what are you looking for?
People aren't accounting for the 1863 features. If every account says there's an orchard in the way, that the posts are still on the Chambersburg Pike, and that there were or weren't trees in the way, or what about why do the trees look different from this angle compared to the Gudekunst views looking up at the other one? There are any number of ways to disprove it, and I think this is the number one problem. People try to prove their own theory right. They don't take the exercise to try to prove themselves wrong. And if they did, they would save the world a lot of trouble before they announce, I found it.
I understand. We a friend of mine and I went out there. We got the high res scan as a in a TIFF, and we went out on his tablet, and we were looking, and we were trying to prove ourselves wrong. We were trying to say, okay, let's find what doesn't work for us. And I don't know. I didn't come to the same conclusion.
Well, I don't think it lines up.
I don't know if it's up to me and Tim.
The angle is right.
People want me, Tim, and Fraz to bless their locations.
No, nobody wants anything. We've already blessed it in our own minds, and we don't need you.
And then again, I'd go back to Scott Hartwig. Where? Give me a single.
If you will come out with me, I will show you. Forget Scott.
That's what happened.
Me.
Because Scott said Scott's changed his
this site
three
we then
times.
have to go out there, and then people disagree with us, and then they
no, because I want you to prove me wrong. Like I want you to show me
If he was right,
why
how
I'm
come
wrong.
the site's changed so much?
But
what? How has it changed?
Like he's moved it like 300
his
yards.
site? I don't know. I'm not here to defend Scott. I'm just saying I agree. I don't care about the nitty gritty. To me, that's what it is. Where else would you don't have an idea where it
and that's
might
another
be.
thing. Like, if somebody can't cure your cancer, you then say, "Oh yeah, well, this smarty
No.
People want me to say where. I don't know where it is. I want to find it.
So you're certain it's not there, but you don't have an idea where it is.
Correct.
Okay, so
I'm
you're
certain
not.
It's not at any of the places people have advanced with those specific angles. People want to say, like the one person this week sent me one picture in one direction. Well, the photo was taken in two directions, and they both need to work.
Yeah.
There are two people this week sent me only one modern in one direction.
No, but see, but we were saying that to us it works both ways.
Because I've looked at the photos. I look at the photos because I like looking at the stuff that the guys have.
Yeah.
Sure.
Flies around their mouths and stuff, right?
I want to look to see if I can find quartermaster returns for the regiments that it could potentially be, because they are legitimately all wearing 1858 frock coats, which is not super common. It's not uncommon, but it's not
the Jerry Coates theory.
Yeah, what can I find out? Because if you find a quartermaster return for this regiment that it's theoretically supposed to be, and they have not been recently issued this particular piece of uniform equipment, it can't be them. Period.
Right.
It's like Gary was saying with the sickles tree. If the sickles tree isn't in the original
that would convince me more than
then it
doesn't line up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just this week, somebody sent me a photograph of the shoes that are on the ground near the body.
Okay.
He's convinced that if he can find a requisition order for that type of shoe,
they're all roughly identical anyways.
There's a smudge on a hat that's supposed to be a Corps badge, not the cartridge box.
I don't think that's a Corps badge.
One. No, there's a different one.
You know what? I think the exercise is fascinating.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And the one thing I guess that it's always bothered me about it is that I don't feel like I have to have a theory or a site, and other people feel like they have to have that. Whatever they do with it has to end in them, finding a site. And Gary and I had this discussion many times because Gary would often say that he hasn't found a place that matches. And I would say, well, I think everything looks like it. As you go around, you can find it everywhere.
Yeah, hills that go down tend to go back up in the distance. Right?
Yes.
Eventually they don't go down forever. They go back up. And people find it and say, oh, here it is. I've laid it all out. Here it is.
Well, because they're going off of one hill.
It's very common.
I think the peace light looks better.
No, but I mean, even the second one, it's looking along the ridge the guys are laying on. So it makes sense that it goes off. It happens a lot of places.
Peace light, we looked at that too, but that didn't work for me.
Oh my God, there was the first peace light guy I talked to, and then let's please move on. I beg you. The first peace light guy I talked to had his angles messed up, and he's like, "Oh no, that angle's this way." I'm like, "Well, what about the bodies? Here, let me lay down here and be this guy or something." And he had no answer for it.
Right.
And he'd already, people start popularizing their theories before they've even thought of it.
Of course. Chuck Critchfield asks.
Chuck rules. I don't know.
Will Gary and Tim finally admit that they're wrong about the Harvest of Death photos? No, I'm just kidding.
Okay. Because even if it was that, wrong about what? I know people who have more than one theory they say is right. You're like, think about
how can that
like it's
be?
in more than one place. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, no. Has anybody ever said maybe it's not Gettysburg and it just got mixed up?
Fraz himself said that when he put it out. I even went to Antietam and I looked all around there. And then there's a viable theory at Antietam. Not viable, but somebody said, here it is at Antietam.
Well, that's interesting.
You know, but he also has a harvest of death theory near Barlow's Knoll.
But isn't it also marked the site near where Reynolds was killed or something like that?
Yeah, by the way, one of the 5 photos mentions Reynolds. And then so therefore, people that want to put it near Reynolds would say, the captions are right. They ignore the other 4 and they focus on the one. You know, so...
Well, I wish you would come out with us and show me all this so that I can put this to rest, but I know you're a very busy man. No, I want both of you to come out.
It took you years to even invite us to this.
Years? You wouldn't talk to me for years.
Ever.
I had to bump into you in the cemetery. All right, Chuck Critchfield says, did some of the 20th century military maneuvers damage the park?
Zero doubt.
Yeah, I mean,
like the swimming pool?
I think, well... When you read about it, I think people go overboard with this. Like, you know, I heard people say, well, you know, Camp Colt was a tank training camp, and they rode tanks all over the field of picket charge and entirely altered the terrain. I'm like, what?
Yeah, I mean, is it worse than a tractor tilling up the land?
Yeah. I'd say in the bigger scheme of things.
But they are laying, I mean, yeah, it depends on permanently altered. Is that a little or a lot? I mean, we can point to the location of old tracks and roads and things like that were put in, so undoubtedly.
So, but out of curiosity,
sorry, go ahead.
So, yeah, unmute me. Out of curiosity, I have heard that Big Round Top was used as a backstop for a tank gunnery range. Is that actually true?
I think there is some evidence of that.
Okay.
Although we've been, you know, we walked on the backside of the Big Round Top, and we thought about where that could possibly be. I think, again, the World War II Camp Colt guys that have researched it, there is some kind of letter or document that suggests that Big Round Top is a...
they knocked the Sphinx over.
Yeah.
All right, Balthazar, he has 3. He says, where was the area of the amusement park at Little Round Top? Where exactly was it?
Interesting. Well, you know, we have the photographs that show visitors around a prominent rock where the tintype gallery would have been. And we can look in the background of that photograph and we can see there's some tents and some tables set up. Also, there are 2 wells where that are obviously associated with that park.
And these are, by the way, about 200 yards south of the Wheatfield Road, about 70 yards east of Sykes Avenue.
So if it's a big place, we're suggesting that the park is a couple hundred feet long, couple hundred feet wide.
And then remember, some of it stretches all the way down to the trolley or the railroad tracks, the excursion tracks that are down there. And then eventually it'll straddle the Wheatfield Road, too. It'll go onto the north side, become the Rose and Steel Museum, the roller rink, and the town of Sedgwick. God.
So if you park at where they put the porta potties along the Wheatfield Road and near Sykes Avenue, and you walk to the corner, would that be the southeast corner of Sykes Avenue and the Wheatfield Road, there's a path that goes in the woods, and you can walk down that path, and I guess it's part of the horse trail.
You're definitely walking through part of Round Top Park when you do that, but it's more off to your left.
Okay. Kind of where the barbecue place is there? Or is it
behind? Is that actually a barbecue place?
Well, it's nothing now.
Used to be.
Behind there is where the trains came in, and up the hill is where Round Top Park was. Luxuriant pedals, a big carpet of beauty.
I'm sure.
So they said.
I'd love to see these pictures. Is there a mapping or way to follow the old trolley path?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You can. I mentioned you can even get online. But my favorite, I think, when Garry and I, and again, a lot of these things we talk about, we've been investigating since we were
for decades.
Young in our early 20s.
Dark-haired Tim and Garry with it.
But my favorite map of it when we were investigating was the Pennsylvania at Gettysburg map.
Yeah.
Which was published, I think, in 1904.
Pennsylvania at Gettysburg is a 2, eventually 3-volume series that talks about the dedications of monuments, the history, and everything like that. And they have a map of the battlefield. And it shows the trolley path.
Oh, neat.
Yeah. And it's pretty easy to, once you have a map, you could probably find one online. You could walk the trolley
I think I've seen it online. You can see that.
Do it in the winter, by the way. It is tough in the summer.
Do all that in the winter. How many hotels/inns were around Gettysburg in the 1870s, and what souvenirs were sold in that period? What kind of souvenir? Yeah, that's a good...
Well, in the 1870s, we had hotels downtown.
Eagle, Globe.
Yeah. And there was even the Wagon Hotel that was renamed the Battlefield Hotel.
Motel, yeah.
So
And
taking
then-
advantage of the
then you had
Battlefield
Springs
tourism.
Hotel
And
by-
the Springs Hotel is the big Battlefield Hotel. But beyond that, the ones in the town and the Springs Hotel, I don't think
Can't
there are
think of
any
too many other
immediate area.
1870s.
Weren't a lot out on the roads at that point.
The Rose Farm, when Wyable took control of it, I think in maybe 1880, he opened up, remember, like a bed and breakfast.
Airbnb deal.
Yeah, so there were visitors that were staying at private farms in the area. But bullets have always been popular. People are always selling bullets, and they were selling artillery shells. And there were several places in town that really marketed these things really well. The Danner Museum. There were a couple guys, one guy named Woodworth, I think, and I got another guy named John Good, and they actually were selling like desk sets made of battlefield relics, and maybe they would take an artillery shell and carve onto it, Culp's Hill or Pickett's Charge, and the Danner Museum sold relics and artifacts. So a lot of them were being sold around the battlefield, around the town.
Right. Okay. I guess they didn't have.
And trees with bullet holes in them.
Oh, yeah. And,
Culp's Hill, a lot of those trees were
Yeah.
had fallen down because of the obviously the lead poisoning from the bullets, but others were cut down and were being sold, and fence rails.
Well, it's time for 6 questions, Lentz. And since he's here, I'm going to let him ask his questions.
Very good.
I mean, Mike, it's up to you. You can edit yourself here because you said that some of these questions were already answered.
Oh, absolutely. The bulk of them have been answered.
Right.
But
I'm going to take a nap.
Here.
Go ahead.
All right. So going back to the electric trolley, is the Supreme Court case in which they were subject to still used for the purpose of preserving battlefields?
The fact is that the Park Service, the government, has largely gotten out of the business of battlefield preservation. It's left to private groups like the Trust and whatnot and other private groups. And the government's role is to provide matching funding to those private groups. And those private groups cannot condemn land. And that's what you're talking about, Mike.
Yes.
The case that established that the government can condemn lands for purposes of a national park. So I don't see it being used. It's certainly not used in our business because no private entity can institute condemnation proceedings. Now, has it been used in the last few decades? I don't know, to tell you the truth, but I know it would still be viable, Tim.
Yeah, I don't know when the last time condemnation was used at Gettysburg. I mean, it was used several times in the 1890s and into the early 1900s. I know that my friend Eric Dorr, his family, the Peffer family, owned part of Cemetery Hill, and their land was condemned. The condemnation proceeding, when you read more about it, is actually about establishing the value of a certain piece of land when the government condemns it, not whether the government can condemn it or not. In the case of the trolley, the important thing about the trolley case was it established a precedent that land can be condemned because it's historically significant. So prior to that, you had to have a reason why you were condemning the property. And historical preservation was not one of those reasons, but it established that. So then afterwards, the park was able to condemn land, like I said, at the Gettysburg Springs Hotel Company. But the Gettysburg Springs Hotel Company wanted to sell the land to the park. They just wanted to sell it for a lot more than the park wanted to buy it for. And the condemnation proceedings were about establishing the sale price of the property, not whether it could be condemned or not. And
Preach it, Tim.
And that's a lot of them. That's a lot of these things. And so I think what Battlefield, American Battlefield Trust or other private organizations have done is they negotiate with the person that owns the land for the preservation of it. At no point is anyone forcing someone to sell their property who doesn't want to.
That's interesting.
That's interesting.
I always thought that was what that was.
Because the eminent domain, you hear that term, and that's what you think. Automatically. That's
early on it may have been.
Right.
More about that, but not anymore.
Right. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Well, and now that's for battlefield preservation purposes. You always hear about like the Tennessee Valley Authority where they're taking people's land.
Yeah.
the
for a highway.
Park.
Yeah, who's getting all CCC on us here?
Yeah.
All right, he's got 80 more questions here.
Well, one time I heard it, there was a story that the War Department, when they were in administration here, floated the idea of putting up Confederate regimental monuments or markers. Did they actually try to do that, and why did it not happen?
Not to my knowledge. I don't. They had a lot of ideas, building a moat around General Warren.
We mentioned that there were 3 commissioners
that would be great.
on the War Department commission, and there is a Confederate representative or a Southern representative on the park commission early on.
William Robbins.
Changes, and it's William Robbins, who works with the Gettysburg National Military Park Commission, that really comes up with and conceives of the idea of Confederate Avenue. And I'm sure that I've read that part of his plan is that they'll place Confederate Avenue and they'll place markers for each of the Confederate regiments that was involved in the battle. And he was in the 4th Alabama, and you might know that the 4th Alabama has a marker.
Yep.
Where they started from. The problem was that the Southern regiments that wanted to put up monuments at Gettysburg wanted to put them up at the spot where they fought. Mm-hmm. Like William C. Oates wants to put one up on Little Round Top. I think it's the 6th North Carolina.
Note that you've got the Demi Brigade of Robertson having one at Devil's Den, a tablet, a government tablet. So, and that's not even to the whole brigade. It's really only to...
So there's units that would like to put up, small monuments at different places. I think the 43rd North Carolina tried to put up a monument early on, but they don't like the fact that if they put them up, they have to put them up at a designated spot according to the old established GBMA rules on lines of battle or what the War Department says where they can put them. And William C. Oates that wanted to put up a monument to the 15th Alabama, and you could read into this if you'd like. I don't think he's told he can't put it up at Gettysburg, but he can't put it up on Little Round Top. But they would allow him to put it up on Confederate Avenue.
Okay.
I would also say, Mike, one possibility is they just wrote 200 other tablets and they're like, oh my God, we're going to write, 250 more just for Confederate regiment. I mean, really? That's a lot of money and a lot of time.
Yeah.
And then we do have to recognize the fact that even though the federal government took over control of the battlefield, the Northern veterans still are a powerful force to be reckoned with, and until the Northern veterans mostly die off, they don't want Southern monuments on the battlefield. And so as we go along Confederate Avenue today, the large memorials to the Southern states were not really put up until a much later period.
1917 on.
Yeah. Robert E. Lee, Virginia Monument, 1917, North Carolina, 1929, Alabama, 1933. So it's when the Northern veterans don't have as much power to stop the Southerners from putting up monuments, are much more recent.
All right.
So what role did photography play in making Gettysburg National Military Park a must-see destination?
I have it in the top 5. Biggest battle, near population centers, which, by the way, resulted in the photography, if you ask me. That and the fact that it was a Northern victory, and these population centers sent Northern photographers over to do it. First preserved Gettysburg Address photography. So that I put it 5th on the list because people could visualize it. They could visualize it. Extra Timmy Smith. You guys know about it. For those of you listening, there's a general here, the oldest general on either side.
Yeah.
William Extra Billy Smith. Tim's long loved that name.
Extra Timmy.
You never heard that?
I've never heard anybody say that.
Catch up on your PCN tapes. So Tim hasn't destroyed me at all yet.
I know. He's been
but
very
he usually saves up for really good ones, and then he just nails me.
He'll get you.
Yeah.
He'll get you. Don't worry.
So
he's still got 60 questions.
So I like the one thing that I find interesting about the Gettysburg battlefield, and of course, it is convenient that the battles fought in the north, and when both armies leave the area, photographers have access to the battlefield, not just Gardner and Matthew Brady, but Gutekunst from Philadelphia and Corliss from
Himes,
Philadelphia.
Backrack, Tyson, Weaver.
Yeah. And then immediately after the Civil War, it doesn't hurt that we have local Gettysburg photographers that are very active, the Tysons, and then eventually, William Tipton himself. Yeah. And then we have this wonderful map that Governor Kimball Warren, of course, oversaw, although he didn't do the actual survey. We call it the Warren map, but the topographical map of the battlefield. And I think William Frastinito is very fond of pointing out that the battlefield of Gettysburg is the best documented battlefield within the decade of the fighting, of any of these Civil War battlefields, and up until past the Spanish-American War. That it's just so well documented, and that doesn't really hurt us at all.
And I would add real quick that Gettysburg's photography from the year of the battle represents a full 40% of every photo ever taken of human carnage on a battlefield. 40%, 43 of the 104 known photos of dead on battlefields anywhere. It only happened at 7 places, and it totals 104 photos. 43 of them are here.
You're talking in the Civil War or in all?
Yeah, in the whole Civil War, there are about 104 photos of dead soldiers on battlefields, including the dead outside of Fredericksburg hospitals, not including post-mortem shots. And 43 of them are taken here. Wow. So, I mean, when you're talking about human carnage, there's a good chance Gettysburg's going to show up. The biggest battle. The one that shows the dead. I think that had a lot to do with it.
God.
Doesn't help that doesn't hurt that Gettysburg's the bloodiest battle in American history.
Sure. Yeah, that's number one.
That helps.
Biggest battle.
Number one.
Gettysburg Address, near population centers, first preserved photography. So
right.
I was ready for that one.
Okay, good.
I answer that a lot.
Cool. All right, Mike, what else?
So when did the federal government start licensing guides, and what was the reason for them doing so?
Good. Well, and Mike, we're gonna that's gonna be the last one there because I gotta get to other people.
I would say
Thank you, Mike.
I'll answer the last part of that question first. We get that a lot. Why? I remember that when they reprinted one of the tour books on the battlefield not too long ago, that a new introduction, someone said, it's because of the veterans insisted that the guides be licensed because they wanted the true story of the battle to get out. And they specifically mentioned that during the 1913 reunion, many of the veterans that fought in the battle came to Gettysburg and had such a horrible experience with battlefield tour guides, they had to license them. I would say it wasn't as much as the veterans as it was just that early on, people were giving other people tours of the battlefield, and people were taking advantage of people, and they needed to control it somehow. Like at some point, we'll have to have licensed ghost tour guides.
Is this around 1908, Tim? I can't remember the exact year. I know I should know this.
1915.
Okay, 1915.
Or the licensed battlefield guides, but there were licensed hack drivers before that. And
when I took after you passed your guide test, you used to have to go to a 40-hour, 3-day seminar. And I was told by John Andrews, the then guide supervisor, the main reason was hygiene. Stinky guides is the way he put it.
Really?
And he said people were complaining about the guides in town picking people up who had maintained an incredible state of self-preservation in their basements during the battle, now know everything about it and everything like that. And that you saw, I just blended a few accounts there, Tim. So that's what I was told too. I could see and you go to some places, you could just imagine what people are told. Even now, the unlicensed guiding I see on the battlefields, you just hear tales of the horrific.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody who's been out on the battlefield a while, and although I don't want to make it sound like you have to be a licensed battlefield guide to know about the battle.
Not
Obviously,
at all.
A lot of people know a lot about the battle. A lot of people give their friends tours, and a lot of people are very knowledgeable about the battle. But we see it all.
Yeah,
and you see the guy on Little Round Top, or telling people that 50,000 men were killed at Gettysburg.
Oh yeah, no, I know.
And you see the Sickles carrying his leg around in a violin case. You hear things.
You get to see the reenactors that like to stand on Little Round Top, and people come and ask them questions, and they'll be happy to answer them. But every time I walk by them, they're never right, no matter what they're saying.
Yeah, and I guess the argument would be anything to get people interested in. And I also think it's people do it for free. That's one thing. but then people advertising it and doing it and charging money for it.
And that's the licensing.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that I think that was the thing that was early on that was really touchy with the federal government, was not necessarily people giving people tours at the battlefield, but and giving wrong information, was that people were charging
and giving wrong information
and just taking advantage of that.
Yeah.
And charging different rates.
Right. There was no
So part of the
standard.
licensing was giving a standard. This is how much you're allowed to charge. You know, we're going to test you, make sure you know what you're talking about.
Right.
And it was a natural progression.
I think I've read somewhere, I don't know, is it in your bylaws or something, where like there's a couple of things in there about hygiene and health and
uniform
and uniform
and things you can't say, like,
you know,
things you have to do. Absolutely.
That makes sense. Well, I'm sure it was a lot of things. Ethan Gaio, he wants to know. He says, have they come across any evidence of the 11th Corps German units having reunions at the park, especially the 82nd Illinois? I guess this is an interesting, or of interest to him.
Well, I think every unit that fought at Gettysburg had a dedication ceremony of some sort. And, you know, one thing I always like to point out about these dedication ceremonies, there are hundreds of monuments and markers on the battlefield.
Right.
And for the monuments, think about there was a day when they had a dedication ceremony, and hundreds of people came to that dedication. Veterans that fought in that unit, their family members, members of families of men who died in that unit. And usually these units aren't like just Gettysburg. That's the one regimental monument that unit is placing for the entire Civil War. Yeah. So there was 1,000 people in that unit at the outbreak of the war. And these units are from the same town. So like with the 82nd Illinois.
Largely from Chicago, one company, Jews from Chicago like me.
That's right.
Company C was Jewish from Chicago, yes. And so did he say, he said 82nd?
Yeah.
He said 82nd Illinois, yeah.
So there is a day when there definitely is a reunion for that unit at Gettysburg. And you can imagine, I haven't read about the day when the 82nd Illinois comes here.
You would think I'd know. I got that from the Chicago Public Library once, Illinois at Gettysburg. It wasn't a full-on book, but it was something.
Like the 82nd Illinois, one unit, the Company I, is Scandinavian. They're from Denmark, Sweden, and Norway.
Yeah.
And so they're immigrants. And of course, and is that the same unit that Emil Fry is in?
I think so.
A guy that's, you know, in the United States, fights in the Civil War, captured during the battle, spends time in Confederate prison or a war camp, and then goes back to Switzerland and becomes like a member of the Swiss Council. Like he's
the
president
of 82nd Illinois,
Switzerland for a while. It's definitely an immigrant unit. So maybe, you know, he's from Chicago or has a relative in that unit.
Yeah, I'm guessing. Do you know where he's from, Eric? Ethan? Do you know
Ethan?
Ethan Gaio?
I don't.
You knew how to pronounce his name. I figured you might know.
Gallo.
It's because he wrote it.
Okay. Gaio, yeah.
By the way, I met the person who knows the person who told us about the Sphinx, and that I pronounced the name improperly. I met him today. I was schooled in the cemetery on the anniversary of the Gettysburg.
But I'm sure they were incredibly happy that we gave them credit.
They were, but he didn't say that. But I could sense it.
People. Well, here's a name that I always mispronounce, and he told me the right way, and I can't remember what it was. Brian Derenick?
I don't know.
Can you talk about how historical interpretation of the battle through different media, books, television, etc., have popularized different parts of the battle over the years?
Yeah, I mean, the first, obviously when you have the biggest ones, the Gettysburg movie, the Ken Burns, putting the first day out to pasture as a skirmish, as a cavalry action, when it's really the 12th largest battle of the Civil War and in the top 7 bloodiest days of the Civil War, if not the top 5. So you've got that. And then you've got the focus on 6 people the entire time. And the biggest focus, of course, is on Little Round Top and the 20th Maine. So, I mean, I don't think in our day and age there's a bigger one than that.
Right.
Tim?
I was going to mention another one that's really big. When I was a kid, and again, I guess I feel a little bit fortunate because I was studying the Civil War before
the Killer Angels.
The Killer Angels popularity in the movies Gettysburg. But when I was a kid, the 1st Minnesota was the be-all, end-all regiment.
Yeah, I remember you telling us this before.
And for instance, in the electric map, the 1st Minnesota was the only regiment mentioned by name in the entire program. And, the loss of 83% in a single charge. And, I mean, it was everywhere. And then, of course, now, largely, the 20th Maine is the most popular regiment in the battle. I think being in between the two, the Iron Brigade was always really popular. Alan Nevin's book on the Iron Brigade made them very popular.
It's a good name, too, Iron Brigade.
Yes.
It really is. And let me say, by the way, full circle maybe, because just this week I looked at a YouTube comment from our Unknown Little Round Top video. Okay, it's Unknown Little Round Top. So people took us task for not doing the 20th Maine, even though that's not Unknown Little Round Top.
Yeah,
but one person said, what? No 1st Minnesota? so on an Unknown Little Round Top one, we didn't talk about that. And he was serious, I think.
I think that my most interesting aspect of this question or this comment is I am looking forward to see what regiment that I'm not even on my radar right now in 20 years will be the most popular.
137th New York.
Which one will be
maybe
more popular?
I mean, I think. Do you think that when they close Little Round Top, that's going to maybe, or has the potential to at least shift the focus to Culp's Hill, and maybe then people will start to fall in love with some of those guys?
Guides will have to spend a little less time there, and that means more time somewhere else.
Yeah.
So I don't know about Culp's Hill. I mean, it is more visitable now, but until Culp's Hill, I mean, it's not like you can pull over large groups very easily on Slocum Avenue and check out the tree clearing.
True.
People don't know the difference anymore. So, I'm more likely to take people there, but
I don't know.
I don't know either. But I think without people being able to go there, they're going to have to search for something else. I
think the reserves.
That's a good question. Let me ask this:
the reserves, because if they can drive, if we don't know if they can go down Crawford, but if they can go down Crawford Avenue, there are the reserves.
I we still. I don't even know if we've been told the date that Little Round Top might close.
Well, you obviously don't listen to our show because we had Chris Quinn on, and he said. What did he say?
He said
spring of 2022.
Obviously, you don't listen to the show.
I just ask the questions and I go to sleep until I hear
that
noise
doesn't
stopping.
sound very specific to me.
No, well, it was a very government answer, but it was a spring of 2022 at the earliest. Yeah. So maybe 2022.
So, but I was going to say one thing that I do know that the park is discussing is how the route will go when Round Top is closed for rehabilitation next year. And possibly you could go around South Confederate Avenue and then make a left and go down Warren Avenue and go across Crawford.
They're not going to do that. He said that they're closing South Confederate after the picnic areas because that's a two-way there.
Yeah.
And you can get out. And then Warren will be closed. So you'll be able to go down Crawford and up around the Devil's Den.
Buses can't go down Crawford.
Buses can't.
But see, the problem with all that is then South Confederate's closed too.
Yes.
And that's ridiculous.
Well, who goes down there anyway?
Well, hold on. Let's just see what they do. Let's not go ahead and hate on our best partner.
Yeah. I would just say that over the years, my problem is, and I think people know I'm not a fan of the National Park Service.
I am.
Oh, yes, I love them.
Yeah.
Yes. Me and Owen love the parks.
They don't think things through. There's no think tank.
Well, I mean, I don't think we need to lay it all at the feet of the Park Service. That's just government at any level.
No, I'm sure.
Borough, all the way up to...
How about that? People don't think about how doing one thing affects everything else.
You are not going to convince Tim or otherwise on this, so let's move on. I remember Tim's letter to the editor. Who would paint the doors of the Visitor Center on July 2nd?
Who would paint the front doors of the Visitor Center on the 4th of July?
No, I think it was the 2nd of July, as I remember. I still wouldn't have written that letter and didn't. All right, let's go. Come on.
Okay, all right. He's not so much creepy Uncle Tim as he is like crotchety old man Tim.
That's to be clear, though.
Curmudgeon
Uncle Timmy.
Uncle Timmy, that's right.
Creepy Uncle Timmy, extra Timmy Smith.
Timmy makes it worse. Okay, Brian Helton, he wants to know, first, is it safe to have you both in the same place at the same time? Is Wayne Mott secretly holed up in an undisclosed location in the Catoctin Mountains just in case something happens to you both? I don't get it.
I get it.
I mean, I get it,
talking about if a bomb drops on this place, Wayne is supposed to,
he's the designated survivor.
Right.
I was with Wayne today. No, he's not here now, so I think I'm going to go ahead with a maybe.
Yeah, he's not here.
Yeah, and is that coincidence or not?
I think it's on purpose. Second,
Love Wayne, by the way.
Wayne Ross.
Yeah, of course, he's cool.
I'm working on my Wayne Motz imitation, not the simplistic sort of exhale, inhale thing. I've got a new thing I'm going to debut. I showed him today, and he liked it. He cracked up.
Really? Okay.
But it doesn't work in this format. It's a tiny camera in a small room.
But it's a wide-angle lens.
That's true. But
do you need to?
No. I
we'll
need to
adjust
get in people's faces.
Well, get in the camera's face. Pretend it's a person.
No, I need to get in 2 people's faces or more.
All right. Well, you got 3 people sitting right over here.
All right. Okay.
Come on. Let's do it. Okay.
So you get over here. Okay, so we got 3 people going on right here. And my Wayne Motz, and this goes back to our earliest video, too, in 1991, and he did it again today.
Eric.
When he tells a joke, all of a sudden it's like, so he'll start laughing and be like, like in each person's face as he laughs at his own joke, which it's usually funny. It's usually when the other people are laughing, too, but he takes a step toward each person and does it. But this was a poor...
It's like he's trying to scare you into laughing.
Maybe, but you're already laughing because Wayne's funny. So there you go. I still don't think this did it justice, but...
That was amazing. That is going to be that's going to be a viral video there.
I met by the way, the second person I met in Gettysburg was Tim. The third was Wayne. The fourth was Dave Richards. The fifth was Charlie Fennell.
And did you? But okay, so I know not Charlie, but did you, Dave, Wayne, and Tim? You didn't all get your license at the same time.
Oh no, Dave was early. Wayne was after him. Charlie was early too because he's got white hair.
Charlie was in the 50s.
And Dave might have been 86.
Tim was like 92, and I was 94.
Yeah, 92.
94, 95, actually.
All right, very nice.
These guys made me feel like a kindergartner when I met them. It was crazy.
Really?
Yeah, it wasn't.
They hazed you?
No, just their nerd, their loserdom.
Oh, and you felt stupid.
Oh my God! They were having guess the colonel quiz. I was like, I was happy I knew the core.
Yeah, but now look how far you've come, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, it just goes to show.
Tutelage.
Yeah, under their tutelage. I need to be tuteled.
Yeah, just not. Jesus, man. Under the desk or what?
Wherever I can get it. Second, having been up the old Gettysburg National Tower several times prior to its demise, I understand the concern Gettysburg National Military Park had for aesthetics and sightlines. In that vein, why does the borough of Gettysburg and or the National Park Service continue to paint the Cemetery Hill water tower blue? Wouldn't it be more pleasing to paint it dark green to blend in with the surroundings? I think I know the answer to this question.
I never made that request. I know a little bit about this tower because the trust bought 2 tracts of land around it. We bought some of it from the Gettysburg Municipal Authority, great partners, by the way. Mm-hmm. And I said, is there ever a chance, that we could buy the tower too? And you could do it. Heck, this is the best tower we have within 10 miles.
The best tower we have.
That is because it's on a hill. It's their best water pressure tower. Uh-huh. So I only dealt with the removal. I never asked about the painting, but since they're all blue, I assume it's a plain thing?
No, it's I looked it up. I Googled it.
You already knew the answer.
I knew that because I was like, well, yeah, everywhere I've seen them, they're either white or light blue, like a sky blue. Yeah. So I Googled it, and the best answer I could find was because, one, you don't want the water to heat up.
It has to be light.
Right. Number 2, condensation. In the summertime, condensation forms, and it collects dirt, pollen, dust, everything that's flying in the air, which then would just look ugly.
But it seems like it would be covered up by a dark green.
So no, but you don't want the water to get hot. So I think that's more important.
Okay. Now, somebody told me, you can Google this.
All right.
Somebody told me that they're painted blue because the birds think it's the sky and they won't make a nest on it.
Yeah, people paint their garages blue for that reason, actually.
The birds think it's the sky and they won't make a nest on it. Yeah. Won't they just run into it?
Yeah, they probably will.
Yeah, so...
But they won't make a nest on it.
There's all these dead birds.
You don't want them pooping on the tower.
Well, they could still poop on it when they fly over.
And probably giggle while they do it. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Are we getting close to the end here?
I hope so.
I'm out of cell.
I'm going to have to... Okay, we're going to do this quick. Ready? Serge Bilanco, he says, hello, gents. Really happy to have an opportunity to hear 2 of you together on the podcast, and I know I'm not alone in saying that. My question has to do with Big Round Top. What is your individual or collective take on the role or striking lack of one that Big Round Top seems to play in the park's narrative landscape today? Go.
Thanks, Serge. Big Round Top rocks. It's the other Round Top, and imagine the possibilities had the Confederates tried to take it back from the Union on July 3rd.
Yeah, I like Big Round Top. I think that maybe the reason it's downplayed is because there's no heavy fighting on Big Round Top. Not any other reason, but I like Big Round Top.
Being unable to see off of it and not having a tower there does
being
not
wooded,
help.
that's an issue. It's
Yeah.
wooded.
Okay,
It's
that's
also
lightning.
a real bitch to go up.
Keep doing it gets easier.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure it does. It's like with every heart attack, it gets easier to get a new one. Jeffrey Jordan, I had heard that the park is reinstalling the gate, or has reinstalled the gate at Ziegler's Grove. That is from, I think, the monumentation period. Is it true? If so, why?
Well, if I understand it correctly, so early on in the monumentation period, we're talking about in the 1880s, there's really no park visitor center. And so to enter the park, you have the cemetery, and then on the Tawnytown Road, you entered Hancock Avenue at that site off the Tawnytown Road through those gates. And then the road went around Ziegler's Grove and down. It wasn't until much, much, much more recently that they put the connector road in between Ziegler's Grove and the Emmitsburg Road. So if you're coming down the Emmitsburg Road, you would have had to ride around and on the Tawnytown Road to go back on the Hancock Avenue. So that was the main entrance to the park.
Where it is today.
Where the stone pillars
where the pillars are. Now,
they didn't put it in the exact
originally
spot.
there was a wooden gate, and then later they put in a black metal gate, and then in the 1920s they put in the stone gate that they replaced. So if they're restoring Ziegler's Grove to the memorial period, why didn't they put an old metal gate in instead of the old stone gate? And I was told when they did it at the time, because we had asked about it, that they had the parts of that gate in storage.
Okay.
So that's why they put that particular gate back out.
Are they planning on adding any fencing to it, or is it just going to be that?
No, I think it's just that. I think it's just a what would you call that?
It's like a gateway.
Allusion to a period of park history that they wanted to represent there.
I think it looks cool.
Let me just add real quick that because you talked about that exit there. On my first trip here, you could still drive through the cemetery. Remember that? So you could just it was like Hancock Avenue, and you just drove straight across to Hancock Avenue and all the way down south on it. So it was a much different experience than having to somehow take Hunt Avenue or cut through town in order to get between the two. Just thought I'd mention
I know.
that.
It's a pain.
I also drank from the drinking fountain several times at Spangler Spring. There used to be a drinking fountain in it until 1991.
They got rid of all the stuff before I started coming here.
Because
I was coming
There's
here.
always a reason, though. Like with the cemetery, you used to drive your car through the cemetery, and I drove my car through the cemetery.
Yeah.
I think, again, it was that same...
You know who drove his car through the cemetery? Bo. Drove his car through the cemetery. Bo Brinkman. He just didn't know he wasn't supposed to.
God.
Yeah.
But
he was on the phone. He's like, I can't find your studio. I know it's somewhere down this road.
There's graves on most.
And I go, where are you? And he goes, I'm in the cemetery. I go, that's not the right place. But go ahead. Sorry.
What I was just going to say, the problem with driving through the cemetery was buses went through the cemetery, cars went through the cemetery, and then they wanted to stop and park and get out.
Yeah.
And multiple times I saw buses pulled off on top of graves.
Oh, yeah.
And
That's
then people
not good.
unloading and talking about the Gettysburg Address.
You can't let
so that was the problem with it.
No, that's a good call, not letting motor vehicles
I
in
took
there.
us off course. I apologize.
No, it's okay. Jeffrey ends it with, thanks and keep the great podcast coming. Addressing Gettysburg is the best. Just had to throw that in there.
I love it.
Brian from Cleveland. At the time, the airport near Oak Ridge. He didn't put anything. How close was the property that the park owned? Oh, at the time of is what he meant to say.
Well, they own the avenues, like we talked about. They own Reynolds Avenue, if we drive north from the Chambersburg Pike, and then splits off into Doubleday Avenue and Buford Avenue and goes around up to the Peace Light. They owned swaths of land.
We've gone the whole podcast without a serious mispronunciation.
I know.
And there it is,
late.
right at the end.
It's a 3-hour show.
Jesus.
But right along there, they had portions of land that they purchased on either side of the avenue, but the area around it, and that area, we're talking about the area just north of Reynolds Avenue between Doubleday and Buford and south of the Mumblesburg Road, was an airstrip for a while. And in the 1920s, there actually was the Gettysburg Air Service, and they gave airplane tours of the battlefield, and they took off from that location.
I think the park, though, might have owned not only to the railroad cut, but I think they may have owned the 55th North Carolina field to the north of it too. I think I'd have to check. That's a good question. But there is a property map where you can learn these things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You can look at online at the Library of Congress, loc.gov, there's a 1916 property map that shows you what property was owned at that time.
And if they owned it in 1916, there's a good chance they owned it in the plain era, the later plain era.
That field we're talking about, though, up to the Mummersburg Road, was not purchased by the park until the 1940s. And actually, some houses had been built along the Mummersburg Road, and there was a planned development there, and that's why they ended up seizing or, purchasing the land. I don't know if they did by condemnation.
And that motel that was there, what was it called?
The Peace Light Inn?
The Peace Light Inn, that's right. Where was that exactly?
That would be west of Beaufort Avenue, south of the Mummersburg Road, up near that intersection. I remember it well.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So it was there in the 80s.
Yeah, all right.
Isn't it like an orchard where it was now?
There's like a little orchard there now.
There. It was directly across and somewhat south of where the 17th Pennsylvania Cavalry Memorial was.
Yes, right on the end there. All right, here we go. Last series of questions. Phil Fucus says, so many. I won't go 6 on you since that spot is taken. There he is, right over there. All right, number 1. How has guiding changed through history? Just briefly, you kind of touched on this before. You weren't allowed to smell, but we've gotten rid of that now, right? We can smell now. What else?
I would say, in essence, it hasn't. You need to tell a good story.
The big thing, though, was that they told you what route you had to take, right, in the early days.
Oh, you're talking about the more the mechanics of it.
War Department days. Well, I mean, early on, it was just locals. And early on, because of transportation, it was more the tour guides were people that had a carriage or a wagon. You'd hire somebody at a livery stable to drive you around. And then those people started to tell stories as they were driving you around. Mm-hmm. And then as more and more people did it and it became more of a business, there was more of a push for those people that did it to understand something about the battle. Early on, you probably didn't need to know much because veterans were in the back of the carriage and they were telling their own stories while you were taking them around.
Yeah, that's one thing that has changed is the demand. Like Tim said, you only had to get a 75% to pass the written test back then. And now, I mean, a 94, you might be nervous that you might not pass the first round, at least because it's competitive. But other than that, I'm just going to continue to say there were bad guides then. There are bad guides now. Some, I'm not going to name any names here. There are great guides now. There were great guides then. And it depends on your ability to relate with your people and tell a good story.
You have to be a people person.
So in that sense, it shouldn't have changed at all.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true.
Let me change it. I don't want to say bad guides. Some guides are better than others.
Right,
today.
yeah.
How about if I say that? I don't know that there's a bad guide.
I haven't heard of any bad ones. Well, Tim would probably have a list of...
Some guys
He's like, hold on, and he rolls out, there's a big roll of paper that just goes flying across the room.
It's like ranked from 1 to 150. I'm at 142.
I think that's probably one of the things that the War Department was going for to try to eliminate really bad experiences on the battlefield.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to become a guide today, or even when I became a guide, a lot of becoming a guide wasn't about how much you knew about the battle.
Right.
It was about how you can relate to people. Don't yell at your guests. Don't run through stop signs when you're driving their car.
Don't point to things that they can't see anymore. Simple things. Don't mention more than 5 names. A
lot of these things, though, sound kind of like common sense type of stuff if you're showing someone.
People do not understand them. I mean, people that don't know how to tell a story, think about it in your life. People that can't tell a story in any forum. And a lot of those people know the battle and want to be guides. Mm-hmm. And happily, a lot of them don't become guides.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And then what would you have done differently as far as park changes or lack of changes ever? This is the last question, guys, so make it a good answer.
Yeah, I have lots of criticisms, but I have no answers.
So you have lots of criticisms, but you wouldn't. Well, how would you do it differently?
I can't think of a profound one, but let me just say this. I would want to mark all 4 ends of the line. We have 2, and it frustrates me that we don't have the other 2. We have the right of the Confederate Army and the right of the Union Army. We don't have the left flanks. That's trite, and it's something I've always wanted to see in the park plan to do it, and I wish they would have. Well, so that's not profound, but that's what I would have loved to have seen that.
Well, I think a lot of people criticize our interpretation of the Southern attack on July 1st. And when you look back through the history of the park, as time went by, they planned on having a Confederate Avenue on the July 1st field. Not to commemorate the Southerners were on the battle,
Right.
but to mark where the units were launching their attacks
Like
from.
Her Ridge.
Right, kind of Hearst Ridge.
And there's
Club.
even a park
great.
map that shows that they were planning on putting in a Confederate Avenue that would have stretched from the Carlisle Road over across Oak Hill and down Her Ridge.
Wow.
And by the way, another one was going to connect Lost Avenue with East Cavalry Battlefield.
Wow.
You know, that was
So
another thing.
I think
Really?
we look back
Yeah.
at some of these avenues, and it just looks like they lost steam. Like they
Yeah.
were going in that direction, and they lost steam.
Buying land is hard and expensive, you know, especially the particular tracts you want.
Yeah, and I mean, they get only so much money every year. They got to just deal with what they have already. Listen, guys, I really appreciate you staying around all this time. I mean, this is 3 hours and 9 minutes on my little ticker tape here. I don't know if it's actually going to end up being that way.
We'll never get those minutes back.
Well, I appreciate you wasting them on us, and we had a lot of fun. I hope the audience is going to like this, and thank you very much. Happy Thanksgiving. Thanks for coming on. Tim Matthews over there, our patron, thanks for coming in. Thank you for your patronage. Thank you very much. 6 Questions Lents, of course, as always, you are a beloved member of this show. That's it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
for having us.
Oh, yeah. Okay. We made it to the end, folks.
God damn.
That was awesome.
How much celery did you eat for all that?
I don't know. I have no idea.
Like 2 stalks?
Our hearts so stout have got us vain, for soon 'tis known from whence we came. Wherever we go, they dread the name of Garry Owen in glory. Instead of spa, we'll drink down ale and pay the reckoning on the nail. No man for debt shall go to jail from Garry Owen in glory. Instead of spa, we'll drink down ale and pay the reckoning on the nail. No man for debt shall go